Yeah, there we go. I'm pointing. Look, I'm pointing. We're gonna have some like new art soon. I'm sorry, out of nowhere, I sort of got like hit by this bout of melancholy. Literally, right as we were about to begin. I have no idea why. Usually, anyways, you guys, Mina Yokoso, alright, class, settle down and let me tell you a story. Tonight, we're gonna be painting more war dollies for the simple reason that, uh, we have a tournament coming up next week. I'm one of the organizers, so I can't join it. However, the thing is, I have to like finish up because someone's gonna be borrowing my units, and the thing is, I just can't let him have, or at least let him compete with my gray shame. So we are doing this as fast as we can, and I am prioritizing basically the units inside my the units inside my my starter set of Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game, basically the Game of Thrones. So we're just doing everything as fast as we can. Here's the thing, right? I'm not really sure. I honestly can't tell if I enjoy like the act of painting, for the simple reason that I don't know why, but I'm not sure if I enjoy it. I definitely like enjoy the results, but you know what? At a certain point, I have to say that whatchamacallit, I don't see the point anyway because it's not like no one's watching. But you know what? Fine. I'm having a hard time. Basically when I do this with gloves on. So you know what? Since I got hit with a bout of melancholy, might as well, right? I have no idea why I'm why I'm like trying to hide my hands anyway. It's like a lot of the big VTubers do it. So let me just wipe myself. I've been like sweating inside whatchamacallit these plastic gloves. So hold on, let me just wipe. I just got really conscious of how my hands look for some reason. Ta-da! Hand reveal. So anyways, uh oh my god, I feel so liberated. Like I've been doing this. I have been like doing this for like for weeks now, and might as well because I realized like last week I accidentally like showed my hand before I could get some gloves on because I sweat inside these gloves and they feel restrictive every time I paint. So anyways, back to topic before we go off. The thing is, even though I'm not really going to compete next I'm not really going to compete next week. Someone's going to borrow, and the thing is, so yeah, I can't let them compete with my gray shame. But the thing is, uh how do I say this? When I think about it, I'm not really sure that if I enjoy the act of painting, because it's painting. Because it's work. I feel like it's work. If you guys have ever painted the wall before, if you guys have ever painted, a roof, no, a wall before, it's like that. For me, I feel this painting minis is the same way as me painting a wall. And can't say that I actually enjoy it, but what I do enjoy is seeing the result. I don't enjoy the journey, but I definitely enjoy the result when it comes to painting minis. So, what you call it? Tonight we're going for it. We have several onslaught, and I think we're about to basically finish Bowen Marsh. And yeah, why don't we just, go for it? So anyways, you guys, for our story for tonight, by the way, we're doing something different, right? We're doing two things. We are going to be listening to two stories. Two stories. Number one is Return of the Living Dead. George Romero's, I believe. Is it George Romero's? Yeah, I think it was George Romero's Return of the Living Dead. Is it George Romero? Can someone please put it down in the comments? I honestly can't remember. We're gonna be listening to it, because this is my thing, right? It's either Realm Drifters or Warhammer. We're gonna be or Warhammer stories. So two stories. First is Return of the Living Dead. Basically the spread of Trioxin 245. I have no idea. Operator at the VA who will watch his tongue if he likes his job. I guess we're looking at the story where they develop the Trioxin that, enable these zombies to raise. And then next one is whatchamacallit, the brutal life of a PDF, a planetary defense force officer who knows no help is coming. Warhammer 40k. So two stories. First, let's go to this Return of the Living Dead story. So yeah, 3, 2, 1. Again, you guys, like it if you do. Subscribe. George Romero and Big E knows we need it. And yeah, links in the description if you want to find out these stories. Sorry, I know there's no point in you guys listening to me whistle while we do this.
Our drift tonight brings us to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1969.
Whoa.
Rain hangs over the city, and inside a quiet VA hospital, another night shift has begun. Coffee is poured, charts are signed, ordinary things.
It's a VA hospital, so the thing is, they didn't get volunteers. They just injected these with two soldiers in the VA hospital or recovering in the VA hospital. It's just messed up. Alright, let's just finish up. What's his name? Bowen Marsh first.
Things. The sort of things no one remembers. After all, tonight should be perfectly routine. And if there was ever any reason for concern, surely the Army Corps of Engineers would have mentioned it. Tonight, we'll spend time in the hospital communication office, where every ringing telephone carries unanswered questions. Doctors will search for explanations. Soldiers will search for accountability. And somewhere beneath the hospital, something with no heartbeat is beginning to develop quite an appetite. You may hear people looking for answers, but before long, you'll hear something else asking for brains.
Yeah, brains.
Some mistakes don't stay buried beneath classified reports.
No, they don't.
And others refuse to stay buried at all. But before we answer the first call, please like and subscribe. Your support helps these drifts into dark and strange places. And if you'd like to support things a little further, you'll find links waiting for you in the description below. But for now, turn off the lights and settle in. The transmission starts now.
Yep.
Pittsburgh VA Hospital Comms Office. George Williams speaking. Go ahead.
Mr. Williams, this is Captain Richard Foster with U.S. Army Chemical Corps. I've been informed there was an incident involving one of the chemical containers delivered to your receiving department this evening.
Interesting.
Before we proceed any further, I'd like to know exactly what happened. What information have your staff given you so far?
Not a whole lot, Captain. The report I got from receiving says one of the steel drums was dented when they were unloading it. They told me a vapor escaped for a few moments before they managed to get the area clear. 2 employees were exposed. Both started coughing pretty heavily, complained about dizziness, and according to their supervisor, they lost consciousness just for a short time. They were breathing when they came to. Hospital admin wanted me to notify every number listed on the shipping paperwork, and yours was at the very top.
All right. That's consistent with inhalation exposure. Shipment originated through Darrow Chemical Company under military contract, so the Army has jurisdiction until told otherwise. Priority right now is containing the affected area, making sure that container remains isolated. Do not attempt to move it again until a response team arrives. Has anyone besides those 2 workers reported symptoms?
No, sir. Just the 2 from receiving. They're already being looked at upstairs. I have to admit, though, the whole thing has everybody scratching their heads. We were told this is some kind of experimental herbicide. That's what the paperwork says. If that's true, what exactly are we dealing with here? I mean, wasn't this stuff designed to kill plants?
That's my understanding as well, Mr. Williams. 245 Trioxin was developed for agricultural applications under Army research contracts. Now, I don't have clearance to discuss the project beyond that, and frankly, there's no reason to believe anything more than a hazmat chemical exposure happened here. Treat it the same way you would any industrial spill. Restrict access to the area, keep any unnecessary personnel away, and wait for the containment team. We'll have representatives from Darrow and the Army there as quickly as we can.
Understood. I'll notify security to keep the basement sealed off until your people arrive, and I'll let administration know we're treating this strictly as a hazmat incident. And hopefully that's all this turns out to be.
I hope so too, Mr. Williams. Stay by the phone. I have a feeling you'll be hearing from us again before the night's over.
Well, there's one more report for the file. Minor chemical exposure in the receiving department, 1 damaged military container. 2 employees transported for observation, basement storage corridor closed pending Army inspection. Compliance office notified. Hazmat response required and requested. I've logged worse.
Oh.
Overnight comms office isn't exactly the most glamorous
Wait, what could be worse?
assignment at the Pittsburgh VA hospital. Most nights I'm routing calls between departments, keeping incident logs, tracking ambulance arrivals, and making sure maintenance knows.
Alright, so basically we are listening to the story of where and how the zombie chemical virus originated. And there was a spill. Question is, why is it at the VA hospital? Why is it isn't it in some sort of top secret facility like Area 51 or something?
Knows which boiler's acting up. Also reminding security that, yes, someone still has to lock the pharmacy before they go home. We had a routine military shipment arrive this afternoon. A few inventory forms needed filing, a stack of compliance paperwork waiting for signatures, and another government shipment scheduled to leave for Louisville before sunrise. Assuming everyone stayed on schedule, I'd have all the manifest balanced before midnight, pour myself another cup of coffee. Spend the rest of the shift listening to rain bounce off the windows.
Not a bad.
Instead, I'm filling out exposure reports for something called 245 Trioxin. Dented steel drum can turn an ordinary evening into 3 different departments arguing over whose problem it is. Admin wants incident reports, Hazmat wants area sealed. And the Army wants everyone to stop asking questions until their people arrive. Me, I just want my shipping schedule back. A leak, little paperwork, a few uncomfortable phone calls. By tomorrow morning, it'll be another file sitting in a cabinet.
I mean, a job is a job. Why bother, right?
Veterans Administration Hospital Comms Office. George Williams speaking.
George, it's Frank down in receiving. Tell me you've got some good news, man, because Hazmat's got my entire dock shut down over 1 dented drum.
Yeah.
I'm afraid not. Army says nobody goes near it until their containment team arrives. They sounded pretty serious about it.
Yeah, well, they can be as serious as they want. I've still got another truck scheduled out of here later tonight, and right now, it's sitting in the rain because everybody's afraid to cross a strip of yellow tape. Administration keeps calling every 10 minutes asking for updates like I've suddenly become a chemist.
How are your 2 guys doing?
Both are upstairs getting checked out now. Tommy finally woke up, and Jimmy too. Doctor says they're breathing stable, which is good news, I guess. Tommy keeps saying he's freezing cold, and Jimmy says he doesn't remember falling down at all. Last thing he remembers is helping unload the shipment. Then he's waking up on a stretcher wondering why everybody's standing over him.
Army liaison told me they're treating it as a straightforward chemical exposure. They're sending people from Darrow Chemical to evaluate the container.
Why in the world are we storing experimental military chemicals in a VA hospital?
Exactly!
From what I've been told...
See, that is my question. Instead of, zombie making virus... excuse me, instead of being stored in an area like Area 51, why is it being stored in a VA hospital? This sounds like conspiracy to me. Like, this sounds like it was on purpose.
We're just a kind of temporary receiving point. The paperwork says the shipment's continuing on after it's inspected. Past that, your guess is as good as mine.
That's government work for you. Somebody fills out the right forms, 3 states
That's military work for you.
away, and suddenly I've got Army trucks backing into my loading dock with steel drums stamped Trioxin 245, like I'm supposed to know what that means.
You and me both.
One thing is bothering me, though. That vapor. It was thick as smoke when it came out. Filled half the dock in seconds. But by the time security showed up, it was gone.
Yeah.
No smell, no residue, nothing. Just disappeared.
Well, I'll add it to the incident report. Anything else?
No, just tell the Army if they want my loading dock, they can have it. I just want it back before that Louisville truck rolls in.
I'll pass it along, Frank.
I appreciate it, George.
Pittsburgh, VA, George Williams speaking.
George, this is Helen Carter over on 3 West. I need to get in touch with whoever's handling that Trioxin spill.
Well, that'd be me for now. Army's still on the way. What's happened?
Something I can't explain. Those 2 men from receiving, Tommy and Jimmy, they're both awake now. They're talking. They're answering questions. Jimmy just asked somebody if he could bring another sandwich because he said hospital food wasn't nearly as bad as everyone claimed. If you walked into the room, you'd think they were doing just fine.
That's good news.
No, it isn't. George, we've checked both of them 3 times. Neither one has a pulse.
Oh, hold on. What do you mean, no pulse?
I mean exactly that. Nothing at the wrist. Nothing at the neck. Dr. Myers couldn't find one
What about the one at the crotch?
either, so he ordered another blood pressure cuff. It never registered. We moved the leads. Tried the second monitor. Same result.
But they're awake?
They're carrying on conversations. Tommy asked what time it was. Jimmy's complaining the room's too warm. They know who they are. They know today's date. They even remember unloading that shipment. If you asked either one of them how they felt, they'd probably tell you that they're ready to go home.
Okay, what's the doctor saying?
He's stopped trying to explain it. George, their skin, it's ice cold. And their muscles are starting to stiffen. Not enough that they can't move. Just enough that everything feels wrong.
All right. Don't discharge them. Don't even move them unless you have to. I'll notify the Army right away.
Let the Army handle it.
Please do. Because if those monitors are telling us the truth, I have 2 men sitting in hospital beds having a conversation without a heartbeat.
Pittsburgh, VA, Williams speaking.
George, Captain Foster. I wanted to check in before our containment team arrives. How are your 2 exposed workers?
Yeah, that's why I was about to call you, Captain. They're awake, they're talking, eating, completely coherent, but there's a problem.
Go ahead.
Neither one of them has a pulse.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah.
The nursing staff, they told me they can't find a heartbeat. Our doctor, Dr. Myers, checked them himself, I guess. They've tried 2 cardiac monitors, nothing. And both men are carrying on conversations like nothing ever happened.
Are the monitors functioning properly?
From what I understand, that's the first thing they checked. Different machine, different leads, same result.
Has either man complained of chest pain, difficulty breathing, blurred vision?
No. I guess one of them even asked for another sandwich, and the other one said he wanted to know if he could still finish his shift tomorrow.
So, no pulse, no cardiac activity, but they're ambulatory and fully alert?
That's what I'm being told.
That doesn't make any sense.
What the?
No, sir. It doesn't.
All right. I'll be contacting Darrow Chemical right away. If anyone understands the properties of this chemical...
Keep forgetting that, the Army doesn't really make anything. Apart from, their actual research or wish list, that most of these things are sent through whatchamacallit, Christmas lists, and then through private contractors. At least that's how it's done in the US. Because if you're going to consider Europe or East Europe, back in the Soviet Union, there's always China, there's definitely going to be state intervention or a state sanctioned contractor.
It'll be the people who developed it. I want one of their research chemists on the next flight to Pittsburgh, if that's what it takes.
You think this could be a side effect that they didn't anticipate?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you. Everything I've been briefed on says it's a toxic chemical, but nothing more. I've never heard of anything like what you're describing.
Well, what would you like us to do?
Keep both men under observation. Document everything. Every symptom, every complaint, every change, no matter how insignificant it seems. I'll notify my command, and I'll have Darrow Chemical contact the hospital as soon as they're reached.
All right, understood.
Mr. Williams, until somebody can explain this, let's assume we're looking at something we haven't seen before. I'll get in touch with you when I hear back from Darrow.
Yeah.
PA Hospital Comms Office, George Williams here.
George, Robert Ellis down in facilities. You were asking earlier exactly where that trioxin drum ruptured?
Yeah, receiving dock B, south basement. Why?
I just pulled the mechanical drawings. Wanted to see if we'd need to isolate the ventilation system.
And?
Well, good news is most of the hallway has its own exhaust. Bad news, it isn't completely separate.
Meaning?
The receiving corridor shares a return air trunk with a few adjacent departments. Normally, it isn't an issue. Air gets filtered before it's recirculated.
Okay. Which departments?
Storage, maintenance, laundry, and the morgue.
Oh.
The morgue?
Yeah. Looks like...
Alright, so this is before the outbreak. Because under the Return of the Living Dead, if I'm not mistaken, basically the whole thing. No, it's the Night of the either I could be thinking about the Night of the Living Dead or Return of the Living Dead. But anyways, military is involved. This is before. Because in the story it was spilled. The shipment was lost, and it was the spill happened in a civilian warehouse, if I'm not mistaken.
They tied both areas into the same mechanical system during the renovation a few years back. Probably saved the government a couple $1,000s.
Well, can you shut it down?
Already trying. That's actually why I called. Main exhaust fan isn't responding. The control says it's off, but it's still drawing air.
Is it an electrical problem?
Could be. Could just be a stuck relay. I'm sending somebody downstairs. Worst case, I'll kill power to the entire wing.
Okay, do it.
Administration's going to complain.
Administration can complain tomorrow.
Fair enough. I'll let you know what we find.
Of course.
PA Administration Comms Office. Could you connect me with pathology, please?
Pathology, this is Laura Mitchell.
Evening, Laura. George Williams up in communications.
George, to which I owe the pleasure. I promise I turned all my paperwork in this week.
Yeah, I'm not calling to chase paperwork this time. Listen, we had a chemical leak down in receiving a little while ago. Nothing major, at least we don't think so, but facilities just told me your ventilation shares part of the same return air system, so figured I'd check in, make sure everything's okay down there.
Well, give me just a second.
That's how it always be.
No strange odors, no haze, no alarms. Everything looks perfectly normal. The refrigeration units are running, my assistant's finishing inventory, and I've got 3 routine admissions from earlier today, waiting on tomorrow morning's examinations. Honestly, if you hadn't called, I wouldn't have known anything had happened anywhere else in the hospital.
Okay, good. Rather make a unnecessary call than miss anything important. Facilities is trying to isolate that section of ventilation anyway, just as a precaution.
Can't argue with that. Although, if they shut the air off down here for too long, you'll be hearing from me for entirely different reasons.
Anything out of the ordinary at all tonight?
No. Quiet evening. Everything's labeled. Everything's accounted for just the way I like it.
Hey, Laura, what was that?
Hold on. Huh. Sounded like it came from the refrigerated storage room. One of the cadaver drawers, maybe? We've got a couple that don't always latch unless you give them a good shove. Wouldn't be the first time one slid out an inch or two on its own.
You sure?
How does that happen?
Sure enough, not to bother security over it. I'll go take a look in a minute. It's probably just one of those old drawers acting up again. Everything else is perfectly normal down here.
Okay, look, if anything
Is it me
seems
or she sounds so defensive?
unusual, anything at all, give me a call.
I will, but I think we're still in good shape. I'll check the storage room, push the drawer back in, if that's all it is, and I'll let you know if I find anything worth worrying about. Talk to you soon, George.
Hey,
See, that's the whole point. I just I know you guys can see it. As soon as I get extra cash, we're gonna get better cameras. I don't particularly enjoy this, but for example, I made a mistake and I have to redo this particular section. But I guess it's just part of the process. So at this point, I'm still trying to determine if I actually enjoy what I'm doing right now. But I'm doing it. But yeah, I guess so.
I appreciate it, Laura. Pittsburgh VA Comms Office, George Williams here.
Mr. Williams, Dr. Charles Halpern with Darrow Chemical. Captain Foster asked me to contact you regarding the Trioxin exposure. I understand you've got 2 hospitalized employees.
That's right, Doctor. To be honest, I was hoping you could tell us what we're dealing with.
I'm hoping for the same thing. Mr. Williams, Captain Foster's report raised a few questions, and I'd rather hear the details directly from the source before I start making any assumptions. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?
Well, one of the military drums was damaged during unloading. A kind of green vapor escaped for less than a minute before the area was evacuated. 2 of my employees inhaled it. Both lost consciousness for a short time, but when they woke up, they seemed normal.
How long would you estimate they were exposed?
Around 30 seconds, maybe 45.
Any burns, skin irritation, eye injuries?
No,
Any difficulty breathing?
not anymore.
Any disorientation? Memory loss?
None. They know who they are, they know where they are.
Captain Foster also mentioned something about their cardiac activity. I assumed there had been a misunderstanding.
Well, I wish there had been. Apparently, neither patient has any kind of detectable pulse. The nurses checked, the attending physician checked. 2 cardiac monitors read flat. Blood pressure won't register, but they're awake, talking, even eating.
Mr. Williams, I'm looking at every research summary I have on Trioxin 245. Nothing in these reports predicts a reaction remotely resembling what you've just described.
Interesting.
Could the chemical have degraded or maybe changed somehow?
I honestly don't know. Every laboratory test we've conducted suggests exposure should be severe toxic effects. Respiratory damage, organ failure, potentially death. Not whatever this is.
Okay, so we're outside the data.
By a considerable margin. I'd like blood samples drawn every 30 minutes. Body temperature, respiration, muscle reflexes, anything unusual, no matter how insignificant it seems. The smallest detail may tell us what's happening.
We'll document everything.
Good. I'm arranging transportation to Pittsburgh now. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Pittsburgh, VA, George Williams speaking.
George! George, it's Laura.
Laura? Hey, slow down. What's going on?
I don't know what I just saw. I don't know what I'm looking at.
Laura, take a breath.
Breathe!
I went back into the refrigerated storage room to check that drawer, the one we talked about. It was open all the way this time.
Was someone in there?
Yes, no, George. The man was standing.
Oh my God. So he was alive this whole time?
No, that's just it. He can't be. George, we performed an autopsy on him yesterday. His chest cavity is open. His organs are gone. I saw them removed with my own.
She sounds like Phoebe Heyerdahl. I forgot the name of that actress. The character from Friends, like Phoebe.
Eyes. He was walking. He
No,
had
Buffet. Her last name is Buffet, not Phoebe Heyerdahl. I wonder who Phoebe Heyerdahl is.
He had his chest, screaming, just screaming, over and over. He wasn't talking to me. He was just screaming in pain.
Where is he now?
I don't know. I ran. I slammed the storage room door shut and locked it. Oh, God. They're doing it again.
Laura, what's that noise?
The drawers. The other drawers.
Run,
They're
bitch!
banging from the
Run!
inside. Every single
Run!
one of them. George, you're all moving.
Okay, stay where you are. Don't go back in there. I'll send security right now.
Please hurry, please. Something's wrong with them. They're screaming. They won't stop screaming.
Laura? Laura?
Hospital security. Mike Donnelly speaking. What's the matter down there, George? Somebody died twice?
Mike, I need you to listen carefully. I just got off the phone with Laura Mitchell.
Laura? She finally catch somebody sneaking cigarettes behind the morgue?
No, listen. She says one of the bodies got out of the refrigerated storage.
Well, that's a new one.
Mike, I'm serious.
George, if somebody's walking around, they weren't dead to begin with.
She told me they performed an autopsy yesterday. She says his chest cavity's open, organs removed. Hell, she was there. She said he's walking through the storage room holding his chest and screaming.
Well, that's a hell of a story. Where is she now?
She's locked in her office. She got out and locked the storage room behind her, right before we were disconnected. She said the other cadaver drawers started banging from the inside.
George, you know how that sounds, right?
Yeah, I do.
I'll grab Simmons and head downstairs. Worst case, we calm Laura down and figure out what really happened. Best case, I've got a good story for the boys tomorrow morning.
Okay, we'll find Laura first, and don't open that storage room unless you need to. The Army's people are almost here.
You really think I should wait?
Well, until somebody explains how an autopsied man started walking, yeah.
We'll check on Laura first. Call you when we get there.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, be careful.
Always am.
I like this channel. I like the story too.
Pittsburgh VA comms office, George Williams speaking.
George, it's Ruby on 3 West.
I'm not really sure if I like this model, PNG model, pointing at stuff. Like, why? What exactly is he pointing at?
Need security up here now.
Well, they're tied up with the morgue. What's going on?
Those 2 receiving workers, Tommy and Jimmy, they just attacked another patient.
What?
Uh-huh.
Were they confused, hallucinating?
No, they knew exactly what they were doing. Tommy climbed out of bed, walked straight across the room, grabbed the man in the next bed and started trying to fight him. Jimmy followed right behind him.
Okay, is anybody seriously hurt?
A few bites, some scratches, nothing life-threatening, I don't think. We pulled them off before they could do any more damage. We've got both men restrained now. Leather restraints, 4-point. They aren't going anywhere.
What brought this on? Have they said anything?
1 minute they were talking normally. The next they started screaming.
Screaming what?
They keep yelling, brains.
Ah.
Over and over. Just brains. Maybe they had a head injury or that chemical causes severe headaches. Anyway, they'll calm down for a few seconds and start screaming again. Tommy said it hurts. Then he grabbed his head again and started screaming for brains. Jimmy's doing the same thing.
Are they still responsive?
Yes. They're answering questions. They know their names. They know where they are. Between episodes, they're perfectly coherent. Then the pain starts again. I've never seen anything like this.
Painkillers?
Okay, keep them restrained. I'll get security over there as soon as I can. I'm going to contact Dr. Halpern right away.
Will do. Please call them and tell them to hurry up.
Security office, this is communications. Mike, come in. Mike.
Mike's dead.
Officer Mike Donnelly, this is George Williams. You copy? Mike, Ruby Collins needs security on 3 West. Please come in.
George.
Mike, thank God. You all right? What's going on down there?
Send more security guards.
That was quick.
Mike? What's going on? Mike? Mike?
It's a man asking for more food.
PA Hospital Comms Office, George Williams here.
George Williams? It's Dr. Halpern. I'm contacting you. I need your assistance. I need something from you. Something that will help me. I need your brains!
What is going on?
Pittsburgh VA Comms Office, George speaking.
Hey, George, this is Dr. Howard Morgan down in pathology. I was told Dr. Halpern wanted tissue samples drawn from your 2 receiving patients.
Sorry, I had a lot going on. That's right. Were you able to collect them?
We were. Muscle tissue, blood, skin. Nothing out of the ordinary about the collection itself. It's what happened afterward that's become difficult to explain.
Go on.
I prepared a small section of muscle tissue from Tommy's forearm, mounted it on a microscope slide. Completely routine. When I first looked at it, everything appeared normal.
Normal?
Then it contracted on its own. No electrical stimulation, no chemical introduced, just movement. I assumed I bumped the table, so I prepared another sample. Different location, different instrument, same result.
Could it still be reacting after removal?
Not like this. Skeletal muscle can twitch briefly after it's removed. Seconds. Maybe a minute under the right conditions. This sample's been sitting on my bench for nearly half an hour.
And what, it's still moving?
Not constantly. Every 30 or 40 seconds. It contracts. Almost rhythmically.
Okay, what about Jimmy's sample, the other one?
Same thing, different tissue. Same behavior. George, I've isolated those samples. Nothing leaves this laboratory until Dr. Halpern sees it himself.
Anything else?
There is one thing.
I'm all ears.
I thought perhaps the microscope stage was vibrating. So I took the slide off completely. Set it on the counter. Walked away. When I came back, the tissue wasn't where I had left it.
What do you mean?
It had moved. Only about an inch. But it definitely wasn't in the center of the slide anymore. I've never seen anything like this. Just thought you should know.
VA Comms Office, George Williams.
My name is Robert Jenkins.
Mr. Jenkins, where are you calling from?
The morgue.
All right, sir, that's not possible.
I'm looking at a sign on the wall. It says pathology. I found a telephone.
Can you tell me the last thing you remember?
I remember collapsing. Chest pains. The ambulance. After that, I woke up on a metal table. Everyone started screaming when they saw me. I don't understand why.
Mr. Jenkins, are you hurt?
I think I am.
His chest is wide open.
Hole in my chest. I can put my hand inside it. It doesn't even bleed. George, what happened to me?
You dead, bitch?
I don't know.
Neither do I, but I know something's terribly wrong. I don't have a heartbeat.
You guys remember that meme? Boop goof, boop goof, boop goof. He can't hear his whatchamacallit. He can't hear his basically guy calls 911 and his heart beats in reverse.
I can't breathe either. I don't think I remember breathing either. I just kept going.
Alright, stay where you are. People are gonna come help you.
I don't think they can. Something happened to me when I woke up.
What happened?
There was a security officer. He was yelling at me. I remember he had his head on my shoulder then.
You bet this is your
Everything
officer.
became pain.
Pain?
It's inside my head. It's in my bones. It's like every part of me is screaming at once. It never stops. Not even for a second.
Okay, stay
Decent acting!
calm.
I'm trying. I really am. George, do you know what makes it stop?
No.
I do.
What?
His brain. I don't know why. I just knew. When I ate it, the pain disappeared for a little while. It was the first piece I found since I woke up.
You killed him.
I know. I didn't want to.
Stay where you are. We'll figure this out.
I wanted to tell you before.
Before what?
It's coming back. It hurts. No. No. It hurts. It hurts. Rage. Rage. Don't make it stop. Rage. Rage.
It's gone.
VA Comms office.
George, it's Foster.
Hey,
We're on
Foster.
site. My containment teams are entering the hospital now.
Captain, thank God. What's the situation?
Well, we've established an outer perimeter. We've sealed every road leading to your facility. So, nobody enters. Nobody leaves. My men brought specialized containment equipment. This is no longer being treated as a routine hazmat incident.
Containment equipment?
Heavy restraint systems, chemical isolation units, reinforced transport cages. Well, we intend to recover these subjects intact whenever possible.
You're calling them subjects now?
That's the description I can give you for now. Whatever 245 Trioxin's produced, we're under orders to secure it.
Captain, these things don't stop.
Our latest briefing reflected that possibility. My men have been instructed to disable movement first, containment, before destruction. We'll determine exactly what we're dealing with once everything's secure.
How many teams do you have?
Enough. Every floor is being entered simultaneously, West Wing being top priority. Our chemical recovery unit's already moving towards the morgue.
Well, there are still survivors in here. Doctors, nurses, patients.
We're aware. Every room will be searched. Anything still alive comes out. Everything else gets contained.
Contained where?
We have transport vessels specifically for biological recovery. Sealed and reinforced. Nothing leaves those containers once it's inside.
So you're expecting to move them?
If possible. But the fewer variables we introduce, the better.
What about the trioxin, the damaged drum?
Recovery teams are handling it now. Every remaining barrel will be located, documented, and loaded separately. Before this night's over, I want an exact inventory of every trioxin container that entered this hospital. Every serial number, every destination, nothing gets misplaced.
I understand. I'll pull every shipping manifest we have.
Good. George, tonight's been a disaster, but let's make sure it doesn't happen again, ever.
Hospital comms office, George Williams.
George! I'm an orderly on 3 West.
Oh.
Please tell me the Army's in the building.
They are. Captain Foster's containment teams are moving floor by floor right now. Where are you?
Supply closet. I dragged the phone in here from the nurse's station. The one with the long cord. I locked myself in. I don't think Tommy saw me.
Tommy? He's there?
Oh,
yeah.
He's dead.
George, he's not alone anymore.
All right, so we're dealing with the full
Okay, what
outbreak
happened?
now.
One of the patients tried making a run for the stairwell. Tommy caught him before anyone could help. By the time I got there, the man wasn't moving.
Joe, what happened?
He wasn't trying to eat him. Not all of him.
What do you mean?
He was kneeling over the body, using both hands, just scooping handfuls after handfuls into his mouth. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. He cracked the man's skull open. George, he was eating his brains. He wasn't acting angry. He looked desperate, like someone dying of thirst.
Did he say anything?
Question is, how would this guy know what dying of thirst looks like?
Yeah, he kept stopping, holding his head up and yelling, "Brains!" And then you go right back to eating.
All right, stay where you are. The Army's almost there, I'm sure. Whatever happens, just stay in there.
They'll have the answer.
Please tell them to hurry. He's moving. He's moving again. George, he's coming. Nurse's station. Oh, God.
Stop! U.S. Army! Stay where you are!
Everybody's here.
George Williams speaking.
George, it's Stephanie Myers. I need help right now.
Stephanie, what happened?
Jimmy, one of the exposure patients, he got loose. He broke his restraints. I got everyone else out of the ward, but I couldn't make it back to the nurse's station. I locked myself in the office.
Are you hurt?
No, but he's right outside my door.
Can he get in?
I don't know. It's just a wooden door. I locked it and I pushed a filing cabinet in front. That's him.
Stephanie? Is he trying to break the door?
He was. Now he's just walking back and forth outside. Every few seconds he just stops. I think he just stands there. And he says it again.
Brains!
George, he just touched the door.
All right, stay with me. Don't make a sound.
It hurts! Brains!
Oh my God, he's still out there. George. Oh God, George!
Brains! Brains! Brains!
Should be afraid.
George Williams speaking.
George, Foster here. Containment's nearly complete. I wanted you to hear it from me before reports start circulating.
Thank God. How bad was it?
Well, better than it could have been, but worse than any of us hoped. We've secured every active subject we could locate. My teams have also completed a full sweep of the hospital for any contaminated material.
What does that include?
Everything. Medical equipment, protective clothing, hospital linens, soil from the loading dock, broken concrete around the spill site, air filtration elements, anything that may have come into contact with 2,4,5 trioxin's been isolated. Nothing will be left behind.
And the subjects?
Contained. Each one has been placed inside an individual military transport vessel. Steel construction, pressure sealed, designed by the Army Corps of Engineers. Every container has been numbered, photographed, and logged.
How many?
Several transport vessels containing live subjects, several more containing contaminated evidence. We're treating both with the same level of security.
Well, where are they going?
Army research installation. It's classified. Everything recovered tonight will be transported there under military escort. No civilian stops, no transfers, no exceptions.
What about the trioxin barrels?
Recovered. Every remaining drum's been inspected and loaded separately from the evidence. I've ordered a triple verification on every shipping manifest before anything leaves this hospital. Container numbers, destinations, driver signatures. I don't intend for a single barrel to disappear into the wrong hands.
And one win.
I'll have shipping double check every document before the convoy leaves.
Make it 3 times. After tonight, I've learned not to trust chance.
Yes, sir. I understand.
Yes, sir.
Hang in there, George. When the sun comes up, this place will look like an ordinary hospital again.
Pittsburgh, VA Hospital Communications Office. George Williams speaking.
Good evening. My name is Dr. James Pembroke. I'm calling from London. I apologize for the hour, but Darrow Chemical insisted I speak with the individual conducting your incident. I oversee a small research program studying experimental neurovirology, and after hearing the preliminary report of your Trioxin 245 exposure, they thought it might be worthwhile for us to compare observations.
I wish I had something useful to compare, but whatever happened here tonight's gone well beyond any kind of routine chem accident. 2 men were exposed during a leak, and since then, nothing's behaved the way it should.
Darrow mentioned increased aggression, unusual strength, and an apparent resistance to pain. Those characteristics caught our attention immediately. We've been conducting animal trials involving an experimental viral compound designed to overstimulate aggression in primates. It's years away from anything practical, assuming it ever becomes practical at all. Around the laboratory, the younger researchers have taken to calling it Rage. An unfortunate nickname, perhaps, but one that seems to have stuck.
Rage virus?
Well, aggression's only the beginning. These men, they know exactly who they are. They can answer questions. They recognize people they've worked with for a long time. And then a kind of pain starts. They clutch their heads. They scream for brains and become unbelievably violent.
We restrained one of them with leather straps. He tore through them eventually. Neither patient that was exposed had a pulse. I know how ridiculous that sounds.
Not nearly as ridiculous as what I'm writing down. Our primates remained biologically alive throughout every stage of testing. Elevated pulse, elevated blood pressure, severe neurological stimulation. Everything you've described suggests an entirely different mechanism. Whatever Trioxin 245 has done, it isn't comparable to anything we're observing here.
Well, Doctor, we had another problem. Earlier tonight, one of the bodies in our morgue stood up. One of our security officers is dead because of it. A few minutes ago, that same man called me on his telephone. He knew his own name. He remembered dying. He told me the pain of being dead doesn't stop, and that eating a man's brain was the only thing that quieted it, just for a little while.
Mr. Williams, I'll be contacting Darrow again the moment we conclude this call. If there's even the slightest chance Trioxin 245 is capable of what you've described, every laboratory associated with it needs to know immediately. As for our own work, I think our little nickname has just become considerably less amusing.
I appreciate the call, Doctor.
Question is, why is everyone talking to a petty functionary?
Well, I think that's the last of them. The hallways are quiet again. The phones have stopped ringing. Captain Foster's men are still moving through the hospital, room by room, collecting evidence and documenting every inch of the building, preparing everything for transport. By sunrise, you'd never know what happened here tonight. Some windows will be replaced, floors cleaned, and official reports will call this a hazardous materials incident. I have a feeling very few people will ever know the truth. I've spent the last several hours doing what I always do, answering telephones, writing incident logs, and trying to keep information flowing to people who need it. The Army's recovered every contaminated item they can find. Medical equipment, uniforms, soil from the loading dock, air filters. Even the smallest trace of 245 trioxin will be sealed away. They've loaded several transport vessels containing the recovered subjects and several more containing contaminated evidence. Every vehicle's leaving under armed escort to a secured military installation. Captain Foster made one thing perfectly clear. Nothing connected to tonight can ever be allowed to disappear. Ever. Which brings me to the paperwork. Stacks and stacks of it. Shipping manifests, container inventories, serial numbers, driver signatures, every transport barrel, every recovery vessel, every contaminated barrel. Every destination has to match before a single truck leaves this hospital. Truth be told, after a night like this, I can't think of a worse mistake than losing track of even one of these containers. God forbid one ever ends up lost.
And one did. Alright, let's move on. What's this? Wello wishlist customer care. Something for next week then. But let's move on to our next story, you guys. Again, like it if you do, and subscribe! We're painting war dollies while listening to YouTube radio. The brutal life of a PDF, Planetary Defense Forces officer who knows no help is coming. Warhammer 40k. For those of you guys just tuning in, welcome. So basically, this is like a tidbit of what I do when I'm painting war dollies, is that I listen to these audiobooks and stories while I paint. So yeah, let's begin the next story.
Our future There is only war.
Uh-huh.
And one PDF officer who'll tell you the last time he fired his sidearm at something that wasn't an orc, the barrel was 3 centimeters from his own planetary governor's eye.
Yeah.
11 years of service, 2 commendations, pressing a las pistol into the face of the man he was sworn to protect. He didn't decide to do it. The war decided for him.
Wow.
And the war, it turned out, was built on paper. Hey, I'm your brother from the Void, and this is Tales from the Void. Today's story comes from an officer of the Kothrin Planetary Defense Force, born in the dust of a mining world where men go into the deep shafts and get 4 good years before the rock takes them. He took the las gun and the bunk instead of the shafts, the practical choice, not the brave one. Then 900 soldiers died for a number written wrong on an administratum ledger, and he learned exactly what his world and everyone on it was worth to the Imperium that ruled it. Settle in. This is Tales from the Void. Let's begin. The last time I squeezed my sidearm's trigger at something that wasn't green, the barrel was 3 centimeters from Governor Maris Delphane's left eye. I need that to sit with you before I tell you the rest. A sworn officer of the Kothrin Planetary Defense Force, 11 years of service, 2 commendations for operational conduct, pressing a las pistol into the face of his own planetary governor, in a supply bunker 300 meters below ground. There's a shape to what brought me there. A logic. Not the clean logic of regulations and chain of command, but the ugly logic of a man who has watched 900 soldiers die for a lie written on an administratum ledger sheet. I didn't decide to do it. The war decided for me. And the war, as it turned out, was built on paper. Kothrin sits in the trailing edge of the Valdrain Reach, about as far from anything strategically important as a world can be while still appearing on Imperial star charts. It is a mining world. That designation tells you almost everything you need to know about life there if you understand what it means in practice, which most people don't. It means that every living soul on the planet exists to pull rock out of the ground, process it, and load it onto bulk haulers that come twice a Terran standard year to collect the tithe. It means the air on the surface carries enough mineral dust to calcify your lungs if you breathe it unfiltered for more than 6 hours. It means the sky is the color of old rust.
6 hours? It's really not that bad.
From the particulate discharge of 900 refinery stacks running day and night without pause, and the only time you see actual starlight is when the wind shifts hard enough to punch a hole in the smog layer, which happens perhaps twice in a Kothrin year. It means the ground shakes, constantly, not from tectonic activity, but from the ceaseless hammering of extraction rigs bored into the planetary crust to depths that would make a Mechanicus adept nervous if he thought about them too carefully. I was born there, grew up in Ankh-Ragen, which is the closest thing Kothrin has to a capital city, though calling it a city is generous. Ankh-Ragen is a hab sprawl built around the mouth of Shaft Primaris, the oldest and deepest mine on the planet, and everything about it exists to service that shaft. The refineries, the ore processing yards, the transit rails, the worker habs stacked 40 levels high with walls so thin you could hear your neighbor's heartbeat if he ever sat still long enough to have one. I lived in Strata 26 with my mother until I was 14, and then her lungs gave out from years of breathing refinery dust, like most people who worked the sorting floors eventually did, and after that I lived wherever I could find a cot that wasn't claimed. I joined the Planetary Defense Force at 17, not because I felt any particular calling to serve, but because the PDF recruiters came through the lower strata every few months with the same pitch. Regular meals, a bed with a mattress instead of a mesh frame, and you only had to go underground for exercises instead of spending your entire life down there. It was that, or the deep shafts. The deep shafts paid better, but the average life expectancy for a deep shaft miner was about 4 years before the pressure variances, the gas pockets, or the equipment failures killed you. 4 years of good pay and then a burial in rubble, or a career of mediocre pay with a bunk and a lasgun. I wasn't brave. I was practical. I turned out to be a reasonable soldier, which on Cawthron meant I could follow orders, maintain my weapon without supervision, and read a tactical overlay without someone explaining what the symbols meant. That put me ahead of about 60% of the PDF intake, which was enough to get me noticed. I made corporal inside 2 years, sergeant inside and when Lieutenant Gosk drank himself into a coma on distillery runoff and never woke up, I received a battlefield promotion to take his platoon. That was the beginning of actual responsibility. Within another 3 years, I'd been given a commission as a junior lieutenant, and 2 years after that, major. 11 years, corporal to major.
That's actually something, because for 11 years, IRL, 11 years means, sergeant. What? Staff sergeant, buck or staff sergeant, and then at the very least, company first sergeant.
On a proper military world, that pace would be unremarkable. On Cawthron, where the PDF existed primarily as an administrative obligation rather than a fighting force, it made me one of the most experienced combat officers in the entire planetary garrison. I say combat loosely. In 11 years of service before the orcs came, I'd fired my weapon in anger exactly 3 times. Once during a labor riot at Shaft Tertius, where a shift boss had been skimming food rations and the miners decided to express their displeasure with smelting hammers. Once during a perimeter sweep when we stumbled across a nest of something in the deep tunnels that the biology's adept later classified as an indigenous burrowing predator. Though I had my doubts about the indigenous part given that Cawthron's ecosystem had been functionally dead for 6 centuries. And once when a transport shuttle crashed on approach to Ankkragen, and the surviving crew turned out to be deserters from an Astra Militarum regiment who had no intention of being taken alive. 3 engagements in 11 years. That was the sum total of the Cawthron PDF's operational history for as long as anyone could remember. We trained, of course. Governor Delphine insisted on quarterly readiness drills because the Departamento Munitorum required a minimum training certification for all PDF forces, and Delphine was meticulous about paperwork. We ran patrol routes through the upper tunnel networks, practiced defensive formations in the open ground between settlements, maintained our equipment to something approaching functional standards. But nobody on Cawthron genuinely believed we would ever need to fight. We were too remote, too small, too unimportant. The nearest active war zone was 3 subsectors away. The closest major shipping lane ran 2 systems spinward. We existed in a pocket of Imperial space where nothing happened because there was nothing worth happening for. That was the assumption anyway. I commanded the 4th Extraction Zone Defense Cohort, which meant 912 men and women spread across 6 garrison posts in the northern ore belt. My area of responsibility covered roughly 800 square kilometers of surface territory and twice that in subsurface tunnel networks, anchored by 6 mineshaft complexes. Shaft Septimus through Shaft Duodecimus. Good soldiers, most of them, in the sense that they showed up for their shifts and didn't steal too much equipment. I had 4 captains under me. Captain Erodin Palik, who ran the 2 easternmost shafts.
I mean, after 11 years of service, at the very least, or at the very best of the situation, he should only be like what, first sergeant or sergeant major.
And was the best tactical mind I had. Captain Resh Solen, who handled logistics and supply with a precision I'd never seen matched. Captain Durin Kors, who was young and eager and hadn't yet learned that eagerness was a resource that Cothran would consume like everything else. And Captain Yendel Obach, who was 6 months from retirement and had stopped caring about anything except making it to his pension without incident. 4 captains.
Actual pension?
18 lieutenants, a support staff of 60, and 830 combat-rated troops equipped with standard-issue lasguns, flak armor, and a faith in the Emperor that varied from genuine to contractual, depending on how recently they'd been paid. We also had, for what it was worth, 3 Chimera armored transports, 2 of which actually ran. An autocannon emplacement at each shaft garrison, a heavy stubber battery overlooking the main transit road between Shaft Septimus and Ankragen, and a single Basilisk artillery piece that had been sitting in a maintenance bay at Shaft Octavius for 9 years because nobody had the parts or the expertise to fix the targeting mechanism. That was my cohort. That was what I had when the sky changed color. It started with the auger stations. Cothran had 4 ground-based Auspex arrays, old things, prefab units that had been bolted to high ground during the original colonization and never upgraded. They weren't military grade. They were the kind of basic detection arrays that mining worlds used to track incoming cargo haulers and weather patterns, and their range was charitably limited. But they worked well enough to notice when something very large entered the outer system. The first alert came on the 19th day of the 4th quarter. I remember because Captain Solène had just filed her quarterly supply requisition and was complaining about the new standardized forms the Administratum had mandated, which required triplicate authorization for any request exceeding
That's the army, alright? Triplicate.
50 kilograms of materiel. She was in the middle of explaining, with considerable heat, exactly what she thought about the functionary who had designed those forms, when my Vox unit buzzed with a priority signal from Ankragen Central Command. The message was brief. Unknown object detected on approach vector from the system's outer reaches. Multiple contacts. Large. Not matching any scheduled shipping traffic. Central Command was requesting all PDF units to move to elevated readiness while they attempted to identify the contacts. I didn't panic. I didn't feel much of anything, honestly, because the auger stations misidentified things constantly. Space debris, rogue asteroids, sensor ghosts from the belt of shattered rock that orbited between Cothran and the system's outer gas giant. We'd had false alerts before. Every few years, something would trigger the augers, and Central Command would scramble everyone to readiness. And then it would turn out to be a chunk of ice the size of a hab block tumbling through on a long elliptical orbit. And we'd all stand down and go back to our routines. I told my captains to bring their garrisons to readiness, had the armories opened, and went to get some recaf while we waited for the follow-up. The follow-up came 4 hours later. The contacts were not asteroids. They were not debris. They were powered objects under active thrust, and there were more of them than the auger stations could accurately count. Central Command estimated between 30 and 60 individual signatures, ranging in mass from bulk hauler-sized to something considerably bigger.
Wow.
They were not responding to hailing attempts. They were not broadcasting Imperial identification codes. I remember putting down my recaf and looking at Captain Palik, who had come to my command post when the first alert sounded and hadn't left. Palik was a quiet man, not given to dramatic statements, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know about what he thought those contacts were. Neither of us said it out loud. Not yet. There was still a chance it was something else. A rogue trader fleet, maybe, or a Mechanicus expedition that had wandered off course. There were explanations that didn't involve the word I could see forming behind Palik's eyes. We got confirmation 6 hours after that, when the contacts reached a range where the augur stations could resolve visual imaging. The images were poor, grainy, distorted by interference and the limitations of the equipment, but they were clear enough. The objects in our sky were not ships in any conventional sense. They were rocks, massive irregular chunks of asteroidal material, crudely fitted with engine blocks and thrust nozzles, and covered in bolted-on metal plating. Some of them had structures built on their surfaces, jagged constructions of scrap iron and weld slag that looked like they'd been assembled by something with more enthusiasm than engineering knowledge. Glyphs were painted across their hulls in pigments that showed up on the imaging as violent splashes of color against the dark stone. Rocks. Orc rocks. Dozens of them, plowing through the void towards Cothrin with the subtlety of a fist through a window. There was fear. Any sane man feels fear when he learns greenskins are bearing down on his world. But there was also something colder, a kind of arithmetic. I looked at the augur images, and I looked at my tactical overlays, and I did the numbers in my head, and the numbers were very bad. Cothrin's total PDF strength was approximately 18,000 troops across all cohorts. We had no orbital defenses, no Navy presence, no Astra Militarum garrison, no Titan Legion, no Night Household, no Astartes Fortress Monastery. We had 18,000 men and women with las guns and flak armor and a handful of armored vehicles, most of which had been in service longer than the soldiers crewing them, and we had the mines. The mines. That was the first tactical thought that went through my head, and it stayed with me through everything that followed. The mines were Cothrin's only real strategic asset beyond the ore itself. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, some of them wide enough to drive a hauler through, branching and interconnecting through the planet's crust, in a network so complex that even the mining guilds didn't have complete maps of the deeper sections. If we couldn't fight the orcs in the open, and I already knew we couldn't, then we could fight them underground.
Fans of Iwo
Greenskins were tunnel fighters when they had to be. That much I knew from the tactical briefings we'd received years ago during a general information update on Xenos threats. But they preferred open ground where they could charge and brawl. The tunnels would negate their numbers. They'd negate their vehicles. They'd negate everything except the one advantage the orcs would always have, which was that every single one of them was bred for violence in a way that no human soldier could match. Still, the tunnels were something. They were a chance. Governor Delphine addressed the planet 3 hours after the augur confirmation. I listened to the broadcast from my command post at Shaft Septimus, standing with Palik and Solans and Kos and Obok, and about 60 of my troops who had crowded into the calm room to hear. Delphine was a tall man, thin, with the kind of patrician features that suggested either genuine aristocratic breeding or very good juvenate treatments. He'd been governor of Cothrin for 23 years, appointed through the standard administratum process, which on a world like ours meant he'd either called in favors or paid someone. He was not a military man. He was an administrator, a bureaucrat, a man who understood ledgers and production quotas and tithe schedules. But I will give him this. His voice didn't shake when he told us what was coming. He told us the Xenos contacts had been confirmed as an orc invasion fleet. He told us that astropathic distress signals had been transmitted to Subsector Command at Vethrain and to the sector capital at Galafax. He told us that reinforcements had been requested and that the Imperium would not abandon one of its worlds to the alien. He told us to fight.
Totally would.
He told us to hold. He told us that the Emperor protects. The calm room was very quiet when the broadcast ended. I looked at my officers. Palik's face was carved from stone. Solène was already making mental lists. I could see it in her eyes. calculating supply consumption rates and ammunition reserves, and how long our existing stocks would last under combat conditions. Koss looked like he wanted to be sick, but was holding it together through sheer force of will. Obok stared at the floor and said nothing. I gave my first real combat orders 15 minutes later. All garrisons to full defensive posture. Ammunition distributed from reserves. Tunnel access points reinforced with whatever materials were available. Mining charges repurposed as demolition assets. Civilian mining crews to be evacuated from active shaft faces and consolidated in the deep shelters that existed in every shaft complex for gas emergencies. All non-essential equipment to be stripped for parts and materials. I also ordered the 3 chimeras fueled and armed, had the autocannon emplacements checked and rechecked, and sent a detail of 12 soldiers to Shaft Octavis with instructions to get the basilisk running or strip it for anything useful. They got it running, as it turned out. Corporal Vreldon, a former mining rig mechanic, figured out that the targeting mechanism wasn't broken at all. Someone had disconnected a cogitator feed link during a maintenance rite 9 years ago and simply never reconnected it. 9 years that gun had sat idle because of a disconnected feed link. I tried not to think about what that said about us as a military force. The rocks hit Kothrid
like any regular military force. It's like that story. Whatchamacallit? There was this new colonel, new base. He went into the new base. The story was new colonel goes into the new base and he noticed outside his office there was this bench. Regular park bench, but for some reason there was a guard posted to guard that particular bench. And you know what? He thought nothing of it. And then, like, after a year in command of that particular base, his curiosity got the better of him. You know what? And he started digging around why there was a guard posted to that particular bench. And the thing is, no one at the current base could actually, like, tell him why, why there needed to be like, a guard posted on that bench. So what he did was that he started making calls to like the previous commanders or previous staff that actually work at the base, and no one could tell him until he finally reached one of the first few commanders of the base, and he asked about the bench. Like, why is there a guard posted? Why is there a guard guarding a bench? And the first commander just literally asking, "Oh my God! Up until now, that damn bench is still wet." So, just imagine, based on his situation right now in this particular story, someone forgot to reconnect a piece of wire. Yeah, just like every regular military out there.
Atmosphere on the 22nd day, 3 days after detection. Some of them broke apart on entry, which was normal for orc rocks. They weren't built for aerodynamic integrity. They were built to carry as many greenskins as possible from one place to another, and if that meant losing 30% of your force to atmospheric breakup, the orcs considered that an acceptable rate of attrition. The fragments that survived rained down across the planet's surface in a pattern that I would later learn was roughly concentrated in 2 main impact zones, one in the southern hemisphere near the equatorial processing hubs, and one in the north, roughly 160 kilometers east of my area of operations. The ground shook when they hit. Not the constant low tremor of the extraction rigs, a different kind of shaking. Deeper, more violent, the kind that knocked equipment off shelves and cracked wall panels and sent cascades of dust falling from tunnel ceilings. We felt the impacts in Shaft Septimus, even though the nearest landing site was over 100 kilometers away. I remember looking up at the ceiling of my command post and watching a crack propagate across the rockcrete like a living thing, spreading from one corner to the other in the space of a heartbeat, and thinking, That's the old world breaking. Everything before this moment is finished. The Vox traffic after the landings was chaos. Every cohort commander on the planet trying to raise Central Command simultaneously. Reports flooding in from surface monitoring posts, most of them garbled, some of them cut short in ways that suggested the monitoring posts weren't there anymore. What we pieced together in the first few hours was fragmentary but sufficient. The orcs had landed in force, thousands of them, possibly tens of thousands, pouring out of the rock wreckage before the dust had even settled, and immediately doing what orcs do, fighting, building, and expanding. The southern impact zone was closer to the major population centers and caught the worst of the initial violence. The equatorial processing hubs went silent within the first 12 hours. Shaft Tertius, which was the largest single mining operation on the planet, reported contact with Orc outriders before its Vox went dead. In the north, where I was, we had a little more time. The landing site was east of us, in the Badlands between the northern ore belt and the Rust Flats, and the terrain there was broken enough to slow even Orc vehicles. But they were coming. The scout patrols I'd sent east came back with reports of dust plumes on the horizon, the sound of engines, the distant staccato pop of Orc weapons being fired at anything that moved. One patrol didn't come back at all. I stood in my command post at Shaft Septimus and listened to the reports and looked at my maps and did the arithmetic again. 18,000 PDF troops across the entire planet. An unknown number of orcs, but the rock count suggested at least 40 to 50,000, probably more, because orcs packed themselves into those things like rounds in a magazine. We had no orbital support, no air cover, no heavy armor beyond the chimeras and the one functioning basilisk. The distress signal had been sent. Help had been requested. All we had to do was hold until it arrived. That was the thought I carried into the first engagement. That was the lie I told myself and my soldiers, because it was the only lie worth telling. Hold the line. Reinforcements are coming. The Imperium does not abandon its own. 3 of those statements were true. We did hold the line. Reinforcements did come eventually, and the Imperium does not abandon its own. It simply reclassifies them as expendable and files the paperwork. The first orcs reached my sector on the 4th day after landing. A war band, maybe 200 strong, pushing west along the transit road that connected the northern ore belt to the eastern Badlands. They came in vehicles that defied mechanical logic. Trucks welded together from mining hauler parts and rock debris, bristling with guns that looked like they'd been assembled from scrap metal and spite. The noise preceded them by 20 minutes. Orc engines don't purr or hum. They roar and belch and scream, and you can feel the vibration through the ground long before you see the dust cloud. I had set my defensive line along a ridge of slag waste overlooking the transit road about 30 kilometers east of Shaft Septimus. 200 troops, the autocannon from the Shaft Septimus garrison, and a minefield we'd improvised from repurposed tunnel blasting charges buried in the road surface. It wasn't much of a position, but the ridge gave us elevation, and the road was the only approach that didn't require vehicles to cross broken terrain that would slow even orc machines. They didn't scout ahead. They didn't probe our lines. They came straight up the road at full speed.
Wow.
50 vehicles in a loose column, with greenskins hanging off every surface and firing their weapons into the air for no discernible tactical reason. The mines caught the lead vehicles and turned them into shrapnel. The autocannon opened up on the middle of the column. My troops fired from the ridge in disciplined volleys, which was about the only advantage we had. 9 months of drilling had taught them to fire on command, rather than blazing away at nothing, like panicked civilians. The first 30 seconds were ours. After that, the orcs recovered. which is the thing about greenskins that no tactical briefing truly prepares you for. You can ambush them. You can kill dozens of them in the opening seconds of an engagement. But they don't break. They don't rout. They don't freeze or panic or reconsider their approach. They see where the fire is coming from, and they come for you, and they do it with a speed and ferocity that turns your 30-second advantage into a memory very quickly. The survivors poured out of their wrecked vehicles and charged the ridge on foot, and they covered ground faster than I'd believed possible for things that size. I'd read the briefings. I knew orcs were large and strong, but seeing one running up a slag heap towards your position, a creature 2.5 meters tall and massing more than any two of my soldiers combined, swinging a blade made from a mining cutter head, is a different kind of education. We held the ridge for 11 minutes. I know because I checked the chrono afterwards. 11 minutes from the first shot to the order to fall back, and in those 11 minutes we killed approximately 90 orcs and lost 38 of my soldiers. The mathematics of that are important. We had superior position, surprise, prepared defenses, and ranged weapons, and we traded at a ratio of roughly 2.4 to 1. That ratio would need to be dramatically better if we were going to survive the weeks or months it would take for reinforcements to arrive. Palek's garrison fought the second engagement the following day, further east, and his ratio was worse, 1.8 to 1. He lost 22 soldiers and reported that the orcs were already building camps near their landing sites, which meant they weren't raiding. They were settling. An orc warband that raids will smash what it can reach and move on. An orc warband that builds is planning to stay, which meant we weren't dealing with a raiding party. This was a colonization force, a WAG in its early stages, putting down roots. I reported this to Central Command and received an acknowledgement and nothing else. The acknowledgement was itself encouraging. It meant Central Command was still functioning, still coordinating, still ostensibly in control of the planetary defense. What I didn't know then, and wouldn't learn for another 2 weeks, was that Central Command's coordination consisted primarily of receiving reports and filing them, because Governor Delphane's senior military advisor, Prefect Marshal Lorgan Call, had suffered what was diplomatically described as a crisis of confidence during the first rock impacts, and had locked himself in his quarters with a bottle of Amasec and refused to emerge. The PDF was fighting, but it was fighting as isolated cohorts without unified command, each sector commander making his own decisions based on incomplete information and no strategic direction. My decisions, for what they were worth, focused on the tunnels. After the ridge engagement proved that we couldn't hold open ground against the orcs without unsustainable losses, I pulled my forces back to the shaft garrisons and began converting the mining infrastructure into a defensive network. The mines had advantages that the surface didn't. Choke points, blast doors designed to contain pressure emergencies that could serve just as well to contain orc advances. Ventilation systems that could be sealed to deny air to specific tunnel sections, chambers and galleries that could be rigged with demolition charges and collapsed on top of anything that entered them. And darkness. The deep tunnels were pitch black without the industrial lighting rigs, and while orcs could see in the dark better than humans, they didn't like it. They were creatures of noise and fury and momentum, and the tunnels denied them all three. We fought the first tunnel engagement at Shaft Nonus, the 9th mine in the northern belt, 6 days after the initial landings. A mob of orcs, maybe 150, had found the surface access to Nonus and pushed down the main hauler ramp, following the rail tracks into the darkness. I'd positioned a company of 80 troops in a gallery junction about 300 meters below the surface, behind a barricade made from overturned ore carts and mining equipment, with 2 heavy stubbers covering the approach tunnel. The engagement lasted 40 minutes, and we killed every single orc that entered the tunnel. Not one of them made it past the barricade. The approach tunnel was too narrow for them to bring their numbers to bear. The heavy stubbers tore apart anything that came around the corner, and the orcs, for all their ferocity, couldn't charge through a killing ground that was barely wide enough for 3 of them to stand abreast. We lost 4 soldiers. 4 against 150. That was a ratio I could work with. I reported the result to Central Command and received another acknowledgement. I also sent a detailed tactical analysis recommending that all PDF cohorts adopt a tunnel defensive strategy, pulling back from surface positions and using the mine networks as the primary line of defense. I received no response to the tactical analysis. I sent it again 2 days later. No response. I tried to contact the other cohort commanders directly and reached 3 of them. 2 were already doing something similar on their own initiative. The 3rd, Commander Drev in the southern sector, told me that his cohort had been overrun on the surface, and the survivors were sheltering in the deep levels of Shaft Tertius with no way out. His voice on the Vox was very calm, which is always the worst sign. Weeks passed. The orcs pushed deeper into the northern ore belt, taking surface installations one by one, but the tunnel defenses held. Every shaft entrance became a killing ground. The orcs would pour in, and we would bleed them in the choke points, and they would pull back and try another approach, and we would bleed them there too. We lost soldiers. 30 here, 50 there, a bad day at Shaft Undecimus, when the orcs managed to breach a secondary entrance that we'd fortified insufficiently and killed 60 of my people before we sealed the tunnel with demolition charges and buried the greenskins under 1,000 tons of rock. But we held. My soldiers adapted. Miners' children, most of them, born in tunnels, raised in tunnels, comfortable in the dark and the dust and the close confines that would have driven a hive-worlder mad. They learned to listen for the orcs the way their parents had learned to listen for gas pockets and pressure fractures. A different quality to the silence, a vibration in the stone, the faintest echo of guttural voices carrying through rock. They became tunnel fighters by necessity, and they became good at it. 3 weeks after the initial landings, I had lost 147 of my original 912. 16% attrition. Sustainable if the casualty rate held. If. The orcs weren't going to keep throwing small war bands into our tunnels forever. Sooner or later, they would commit a serious force, or they would find another way in, or they would simply seal the entrances and starve us out. Time was not on our side, no matter how many greenskins we killed in the dark. I sent astropathic requests for status updates to Central Command every 3 days. The responses, when they came, were identical. Distress signals transmitted, reinforcement request logged. Await further instructions. The words didn't change, the same phrasing, the same flat bureaucratic language, as if someone had written a template response and was copying it each time. I told myself this was normal. Administratum communications were always like this. The Imperium didn't send personalized updates to individual cohort commanders on backwater mining worlds. The machinery of response was vast and slow and impersonal, and the fact that it hadn't produced results yet didn't mean it wasn't working. Captain Solène was the first to voice what I was thinking. She came to my command post on the 26th day, closed the door behind her, and sat down across from me with the expression of someone who has run the numbers and doesn't like the answer. She told me that at current consumption rates, our ammunition stocks would last approximately 40 more days. Food was less of a concern because the shaft complexes had emergency rations stored for gas emergency evacuations, and those stocks were substantial. Water was recycled through the mine's environmental systems. Power came from geothermal taps bored into the planetary crust. We could sustain ourselves underground for months, possibly longer. But ammunition was finite and we were spending it every day. I told her I knew. She looked at me for a long moment and then asked the question she'd come to ask. Had I heard anything from Sector Command? Not Central Command on Cothran, not Governor Delphane's staff, but actual sector-level command at Vethrain. Had anyone outside the system acknowledged our distress signals? I told her I hadn't. She nodded once and left. Neither of us said the thing that was sitting between us. 26 days without a response. The Imperium moved slowly. Everyone knew that. Astropathic signals could take weeks depending on warp conditions. Military mobilization took longer. 26 days was nothing. That's what I told myself. 45 days. That was when I stopped believing. On the 45th day, I received a Vox communication from Ancragan's Central Command, informing me that Governor Delphane was restructuring the planetary defense hierarchy. Prefect Marshal Call had been relieved of command, which was a polite way of saying he'd been found dead in his quarters from a combination of alcohol and shame, or possibly just alcohol. His replacement was a man named Jurisdiction Captain Hovaneth Skyle, who I'd never heard of and who turned out to be one of Delphane's personal staff with no military experience whatsoever. The communication also informed me that astropathic confirmation had been received from Subsector Command at Vethrain. Our distress signals had been acknowledged. Reinforcements were being arranged. Not dispatched, not en route. Being arranged, the distinction was subtle enough that most of my soldiers, when I relayed a carefully edited version of the update, took it as good news. Help was coming. The Imperium had heard them. They just needed to hold a little longer. I took the original, unedited communication and read it again in my quarters that night, alone, with the blast door sealed. I read it 4 times. Being arranged. In the lexicon of the administratum, that phrase had a specific weight. Dispatched meant boots on transports. En route meant ships in the void. Being arranged meant paperwork. It meant the request was in a queue somewhere, being evaluated against competing priorities, waiting for someone with sufficient authority to approve the allocation of resources. It meant nothing was happening yet. It meant that the machine was aware of us, but had not yet decided whether we were worth saving. I didn't sleep that night.
I mean, based on the other stories that we've actually covered, that's like the best thing ever! It's like they're doing better than expected.
The extraction rigs were still running in the deep shafts. The mining guilds had refused to shut them down. Production quotas had to be maintained regardless of whether there'd be anyone left alive to meet them.
They had to, right? Because here's the thing, they had to prove that they were still worth something in the Imperium. Because the moment they stop producing, that arrangement would stop.
I lay on my cot and listened to their pulse through 300 meters of rock and ran the numbers instead of sleeping. 765 soldiers remaining. Ammunition for perhaps 40 more days of fighting at current expenditure. One word from Subsector Command that told me everything I needed to know and nothing I wanted to hear. Arranged. I decided 2 things that night. First, that I would continue to tell my soldiers that reinforcements were coming, because a soldier who believes help is on the way will fight harder and longer than one who knows he's been forgotten. Second, that I would begin planning for the possibility that no one was coming at all. The planning was quiet. I didn't share it with anyone except Palak, who I trusted more than anyone else under my command, and who I suspected had reached the same conclusions I had. We began mapping escape routes through the deepest tunnel networks, identifying sections that could be collapsed to deny the orcs access while preserving passage for our forces. We inventoried every weapon, every charge, every piece of equipment that could be repurposed for combat. We identified fallback positions, each one deeper than the last, a chain of defensive lines that would allow us to trade space for time as the orcs pushed inward. We also started talking to the miners, not the mining guild leadership who were still insisting on production quotas and threatening to file formal complaints with the administratum about disruptions to the extraction schedule, but the actual working miners. The shaft crews, the hauler drivers, the demolition teams who handled the tunnel blasting charges. These were people who knew the tunnels better than any PDF soldier, who could navigate in the dark by touch and sound, who understood rock stress and gas flow and all the 1,000 ways that a tunnel could kill you if you didn't respect it. I offered them a deal. Help us fight, and I would ensure their families got priority access to the deep shelters and the emergency rations. Most of them agreed, not because they were brave, but because they were practical. Same reason I'd joined the PDF in the first place. By the 50th day after invasion, I had 708 combat-effective PDF soldiers, approximately 300 armed civilians, and a tunnel network that I had turned into the most lethal defensive position I could manage with the resources available. We'd killed over 600 orcs in the northern sector. We'd lost 2 shaft complexes on the surface, Nonus and Duodecimus, but we still held the underground levels of both. The Basilisk, repositioned to a concealed surface emplacement near Shaft Septimus, had proven devastatingly effective against orc vehicle concentrations, though we were rationing shells carefully. We were holding. We were fighting. We were dying slowly, but we were dying on our terms, in our tunnels, making the greenskins pay for every meter. All we needed was for someone, somewhere in the vast machinery of the Imperium, to decide that Kothrin was worth saving. On the 53rd day, the Vox array at Ankragen Central Command picked up ship signatures entering the system. Multiple vessels, Imperial drives, broadcasting standard naval identification codes.
Nice.
The message spread through the PDF communication network like a current. Ships in system. Imperial ships. The reinforcements had come. I remember the sound that went through Shaft Septimus when the word reached us. Not a cheer. Something raw, from the gut. Soldiers who hadn't smiled in weeks were grinning. Corporal Vreldin, who had become something of a talisman for the cohort after fixing the Basilisk, actually laughed out loud. Captain Koss, who had aged 10 years in 53 days, put his head in his hands and wept, and nobody said a word about it because half of them wanted to do the same. I didn't celebrate. I listened to the reports coming in from the Vox Geeks array, and I waited for details.
By the way, if you guys hear that, we're currently in the middle of a storm right now. Bad weather.
How many ships? What class? What were they carrying? A full Astra Militarum regiment? 2? A company of Astartes? Even a single company of Space Marines would change everything. 100 of the Emperor's Angels could do what 18,000 PDF troopers couldn't. The details came in slowly, piece by piece, and each piece made the picture smaller. Not a fleet, a small flotilla. Not multiple warships, 1 escort frigate and 2 transports. Not a regiment, not 2 regiments, not even a single battalion. 1 company, 320 soldiers, and a Departamento Munitorum Lexographier Prime with a sealed briefcase and orders from Subsector Command. 320 soldiers to reinforce a world fighting for its life against tens of thousands of orcs. I read the communication 3 times, the way I'd read the being arranged message, as if repetition might change the words. It didn't. 320 troops. And when the troop manifest came through and I saw the unit designation, I understood something I'd been refusing to understand for 53 days. The 14th Penal Company, Vathrain Sector,
my bad.
convict soldiers, condemned men and women given las guns and explosive discipline collars and pointed at the enemy with a life expectancy measured in engagements rather than years. The Imperium had not sent us reinforcements. It had sent us its garbage. The men and women it had already decided were worth nothing, deployed to a world it had already decided was worth nothing. In a gesture so hollow it was almost worse than no response at all. That was the first time I understood, not suspected, not feared. Understood, with the clarity of a man looking at a structural survey and seeing the fracture line that means the whole shaft is going to come down. Cothran had been written off. The planet, the mines, the 18,000 PDF soldiers, the civilian population, all of it. Written off. Entered into some ledger somewhere as an acceptable loss, a line item in a cost-benefit analysis that had determined the resources required to save us exceeded the value of what we produced. We were already dead. The Imperium just hadn't told us yet. The Penal Company landed at Ankregan's shuttle port under Orc fire. 3 of the shuttles made it down intact. The 4th took a direct hit from a looted artillery piece that the Greenskins had dragged to high ground overlooking the port, and 63 convict soldiers died without ever setting foot on Cothran's surface. The survivors unloaded under a storm of Orc fire and were immediately herded into the underground transit tunnels by PDF guides. By the time the shuttle port was cleared, another 11 penal soldiers were dead, and Ankregan's last functional surface landing zone had been rendered unusable by the Orc bombardment that had targeted the incoming transports. I met the 14th Penal Company's commanding officer 7 hours later, when a contingent was transferred to my sector via the subsurface rail network. Her name was Discipline Mistress Elone Voss, a lean woman with ochmetic replacements for both hands and one eye, and a manner that suggested she viewed the universe as a series of problems that could be solved through the efficient application of violence. She'd been commanding penal companies for 14 years, which was itself remarkable given that the average command tenure for a discipline mistress was about 3. Most of them got killed by their own troops. Varsk had survived because her troops were more afraid of her than they were of the enemy, and because she possessed an instinct for combat that no amount of training could replicate. She brought 140 convicts with her. The rest had been distributed to other sectors. I watched them file off the transit cars and into the shaft Septimus garrison, and what I saw was exactly what I'd expected. Gaunt men and women in mismatched flak armor, explosive collars visible around their necks, carrying standard-issue las guns with the kind of loose grip that said they'd received minimal weapons training. Most of them had the hollow look of people who had stopped expecting to survive a long time ago. A few had the opposite look, the feral alertness of predators assessing a new environment, and those were the ones I watched most carefully. Varsk told me her orders were simple. Deploy her company in the highest attrition combat zone available and maintain offensive pressure against the orcs until her forces were combat ineffective, at which point any survivors would be reassigned at the discretion of the local commander. That was it. No strategic objective, no defensive mandate, no extraction plan. Her soldiers were ammunition. Human ammunition to be spent. I asked her what she knew about the broader strategic situation. She told me she knew nothing beyond what I'd already been told. She'd received her deployment orders at Vathrain, loaded her company onto the transports, and come straight to Cothran. Nobody had briefed her on the planetary situation, the orc strength, or the PDF disposition. She hadn't asked. In her experience, asking questions above her authority level was an efficient way to attract attention she didn't want. Then I asked about the Lexographer Prime. Varsk's expression changed. Not much. Just a slight tightening around her augmetic eye, but enough for me to notice. She told me the lexographer prime was a man called Hutton Vark, Departamento Munitorum, and that he'd traveled in separate quarters aboard the transport with his own guard detail of 4 Munitorum provosts. He'd spoken to no one during the voyage. His sealed briefcase had not left his sight. Upon landing, he'd gone directly to Governor Delphane's bunker at Ancragen and had not been seen since. I asked Varsk what she thought he was there for. She said she didn't think about things that weren't her concern, but that in her experience, the Munitorum didn't send lexographer primes to war zones to boost morale.
Yeah.
They sent them to count things. What things? She didn't speculate. But she'd been in enough dying theaters to recognize the pattern. The ship that brings the last reinforcements also brings the man with the clipboard. The soldier comes to fight. The clerk comes to decide whether the fighting is worth continuing. I integrated Varsk's penal soldiers into my tunnel defense network and put them exactly where they'd be most useful and most expendable. The forward positions at Shaft Nonus and Shaft Duodecimus, where the orc pressure was heaviest and the fighting was constant. The convicts fought well, which shouldn't have surprised me, but did. Men and women with nothing to lose and explosive collars around their necks tend to discover reserves of aggression that regular soldiers can't match. They held the forward positions for 3 weeks and lost 60 of their number, which freed my PDF troops for the middle defensive lines and gave us breathing room we desperately needed. During those 3 weeks, I tried to find out more about lexographer prime Hutton Vark and his sealed briefcase. This was not easy. Vark had installed himself in Governor Delphane's bunker complex beneath Ancragen and was operating behind Munitorum security protocols that my PDF clearance couldn't penetrate. My communications to Central Command requesting a briefing on the lexographer prime's mission were met with silence. Direct Vox requests to Delphane's staff were declined. I was told through channels that the lexographer prime was conducting a routine asset assessment and that his findings would be shared with all cohort commanders at the appropriate time. A routine asset assessment during a planetary invasion with a penal company as escort. Captain Palik suggested we stop asking questions through official channels and start asking them through unofficial ones. Palik had a contact in Delphane's logistics staff, a supply clerk named Kresh, who'd been skimming ration surpluses for years and selling them to the mining guilds. Kresh owed Palik favors, the kind of favors that accumulate when someone knows about your side business and chooses not to report it. Palik leaned on him hard, and on the
Done! Holy crap! 2 hours, 1 half-finished mini. Is it done? I honestly can't tell, but anyways. Nope, not yet done.
71st day after the invasion, Kresh came through with something that made the air in my command post feel colder than the tunnels outside. Lexographer Prime Hutton Vark was not conducting a routine asset assessment. He was conducting a strategic viability audit. Specifically, he had been dispatched by
Strategic Viability Audit. Let's find out what it means.
Subsector Command at Vthrain to evaluate whether the remaining mineral output of Cawthron justified the deployment of additional military resources to defend it. He was, in simple terms, putting a price on our lives and comparing it to the price of saving them. If his assessment determined that Cawthron's output was sufficient to warrant intervention, reinforcements would be dispatched. If not, the planet would be formally classified as an acceptable strategic loss. The subsector's military assets would be deployed elsewhere, and the PDF and remaining civilian population would be left to their fate. I read Kresh's intelligence report, and the arithmetic of it settled into place like tumblers in a lock. Our survival depended on a Munitorum clerk's assessment of our mineral output. Every soldier who'd died, every tunnel engagement, every desperate stand in the dark.
Wait! How exactly would that clerk get out of the planet? Like, there's no more way out of the planet. How exactly are they gonna get out? I mean, if that clerk provides a negative report, would they actually send transport or rescue for that clerk? Comments, please.
All of it would be reduced to a number on a ledger sheet, and if that number wasn't high enough, we would be left to die. I decided to meet Houghton Vark. Getting to Ankrogen wasn't simple. The surface route between the northern Orbelt and the capital was completely overrun. Orc warbands controlled the transit road, the open ground, and most of the surface installations between my sector and the city. But the subsurface rail network still functioned in sections, and with careful routing through maintenance tunnels and abandoned bore shafts, it was possible to travel underground from Shaft Septimus to Ankrogen Central in around 12 hours. I took Palik and 6 soldiers as escort, left Solen in command of the cohort, and went. The journey was a lesson in what Kothrin had become. The tunnels between the northern sector and Ankrogen passed through areas that had been fought over and abandoned, sections where the walls were scorched black from firefights, and the floor was littered with spent shell casings and the detritus of war. We passed through galleries where the lights had failed, and the only illumination came from our lamp packs, the beams cutting through dust that hadn't settled since the last engagement. We heard orcs twice, distant sounds echoing through cross tunnels, guttural voices, and the clang of metal on metal. And both times we diverted through side passages and moved in silence until the sounds faded. We reached Ankrogen Central on the 73rd day. The bunker complex beneath the city was a maze of reinforced corridors and blast-sealed chambers, and it was crowded beyond anything I'd expected. Thousands of civilians had taken shelter underground, families from the surface habs that the orcs had destroyed, mining crews from overrun shaft complexes, refugees from every sector of the planet who had found their way to the capital by whatever route remained open. They sat in the corridors with their possessions piled around them, silent for the most part, the blank-faced patience of people who have given control of their lives to someone else and are waiting to learn whether that someone else intends to let them live. Governor Delphane's command center occupied the deepest level of the bunker, behind 3 separate security checkpoints staffed by his personal guard. These were not PDF soldiers. They were house troops,
I'm assuming, if you were a governor, you can't trust the PDF. Because why would you? I mean, you literally stepped on these people for the duration of your career. Spanish era Walloon guards, Napoleonic era. The Spanish royalty kept what they call the Wallon guards. Basically, they were foreigners. They kept a regiment of foreign guards to actually guard the royals. Why? Because just in case of a revolution or a rebellion, those foreigners wouldn't be sympathetic to the local population. They made sure that these quote-unquote foreigners doesn't speak the same language or doesn't speak Spanish, so that they wouldn't be sympathetic to the plight of the rebels or the plight of the common people. Anyways.
National security personnel recruited from off-world and paid from Delphane's personal funds. They wore better armor than my soldiers, carried better weapons, and looked at my PDF uniform with the specific variety of contempt that private security reserves for public servants. I noticed, as they processed my credentials, that the corridor behind the 3rd checkpoint branched in 2 directions. The left branch, which I could see, led to the command center. The right branch was sealed with a heavy blast door that bore no markings and had a separate access panel. I asked what was behind it. One of the guards told me it was restricted storage. Something about the way he said it, the practiced flatness, the immediate answer with no hesitation, told me it was a lie he'd been told to tell. I filed it and moved on, because I had more immediate concerns. I told them I wanted to see the governor. They told me the governor was unavailable. I told them I was a cohort commander with an active combat sector, and I had operational matters to discuss. They told me to submit a written request through proper channels. I was considering my options, none of which were good, when a door opened further down the corridor and a man stepped out. He was small, almost frail, with the pallid complexion of someone who spent his life under artificial lighting, and he wore the gray robes of the Departamento Munitorum, with the rank insignia of a lexographer prime on his collar. His eyes were the color of wet slate, and they moved over me with the quick, cataloging efficiency of someone who assessed everything he saw in terms of its utility. Hutton Vark looked at my rank insignia, looked at my escort, and then looked at me with an expression that I would later come to recognize as his default state. Polite professional interest overlaying absolute indifference to human suffering. He asked me who I was. I told him. He asked me which sector I commanded. I told him. He nodded once as if confirming something on an internal checklist, and then invited me into his office. The office was a converted storage room, a desk, a chair, 2 data slates, and the sealed briefcase, which sat on the desk like a reliquary. Vark sat behind the desk and gestured for me to sit in the room's only other chair, a folding metal thing that had probably been requisitioned from a civilian shelter. Palik and my escort waited in the corridor. I asked Vark directly what he was doing on Kothrin. He told me, without hesitation or evasion, exactly what Kresh's intelligence had already suggested. He was conducting a strategic viability assessment on behalf of Subsector Command. His task was to evaluate the planet's remaining productive capacity and submit a recommendation regarding further military investment.
He can lie and save himself. Why? Because if it took them that long, the viability that long, and the war continues, he's probably going to be dead or too old to do anything to him, significant to him. Just lie about it. The bureaucracy would cover it.
He said this in the same tone a mining engineer might use to discuss ore grades, professionally, precisely, without emotional inflection. When I asked about his findings so far, he told me they were preliminary but trending negative. Based on the production data he'd reviewed from Governor Delphane's records, Kothrin's adamantium output was modest by sector standards. The planet produced approximately 14,000 tons of refined adamantium per standard year, which placed it in the lower quartile of mining worlds in the Valdrain Reach. The cost of mounting a full military intervention, a reinforced Astra Militarum regiment with armor and air support, and the naval assets required for orbital clearance would exceed the projected output value of the planet over a 20-year period. By Munitorum calculus, the investment was not justified. 14,000 tons, that was the number that was going to kill us. Not the orcs, not their guns and blades and brutal strength. A number, a figure on a production report that said our world didn't produce enough to be worth saving.
Wasn't worth saving.
How long, I asked him, before his assessment was due. 90 days from deployment, he said. He had approximately 50 remaining. After that, his report would be transmitted to Vethrain via the escort frigate, which was holding station at the system's edge, and Subsector Command would make its decision based on his recommendation. 50 days. We had 50 days to convince a Munitorum clerk that our planet was worth saving, or the machinery of imperial indifference would grind us to dust as surely as the orcs would. I left Vark's office and stood in the corridor outside. Palik waited. The refugees in the corridors above us shuffled and murmured. The muffled concussion of orc artillery shelling Ancragin's surface filtered down through 300 meters of rock and metal. A distant thudding that you stopped noticing after a while, but that never actually stopped. 14,000 tons. The number didn't sit right. I'd grown up watching ore haulers roll through Ankaragen in convoys long enough to block the transit roads. I'd served in the Northern Belt for years and seen the extraction rates posted on the guild boards. I'd watched bulk haulers fill their holds twice a year until the pad servitors reported maximum capacity.
The governor was lying. The governor wants out. Crap.
14,000 tons for the entire planet didn't match what I'd seen with my own eyes. I couldn't prove it, but the number stayed with me through the 12-hour journey back to Shaft Septimus, and it was still nagging at me when I arrived at my command post and found a situation report that pushed everything else aside. While I'd been in Ankaragen, the Orcs had launched their largest assault yet against the northern sector. A full warband, over 1,000 greenskins, had hit Shaft Octavis from 3 directions simultaneously, breaching the surface perimeter and pushing into the upper tunnel levels. Captain Koss, commanding the Shaft Octavis garrison, had committed his entire reserve to hold the main gallery junction and had managed to stabilize the line, but only after losing 91 soldiers. 91 in a single engagement. Nearly 10% of my remaining combat strength gone in an afternoon. Koss's voice on the Vox was hoarse and brittle. He told me the Orcs had pulled back, but they hadn't gone far. He could hear them in the upper tunnels, building, hammering, doing whatever it was Orcs did when they decided to make a place theirs. They were fortifying, digging in, preparing for a sustained push rather than another headlong charge. These Orcs had learned from the tunnel fights. They'd adapted. That was the thing about greenskins that the briefings never adequately conveyed. They learned. Not quickly, not elegantly, but they learned. And an Orc that had learned how you fought was considerably more dangerous than one that hadn't. I ordered Koss to hold what he had and not to counterattack. Reinforcements were coming, I said. I didn't specify what kind of reinforcements, because telling a man who'd just lost 91 soldiers that his relief would be convict troops with explosive collars seemed unnecessarily cruel. 3 days after returning from Ankaragen, I pulled the mining guild records for the northern ore belt. This wasn't difficult. The guild offices at each shaft complex maintained local production logs as a condition of their operating charters, independent from the centralized records that Governor Delphane's staff compiled for administratum reporting. The guild logs were meticulous because the miners' pay was calculated from output volumes, and short-changing a mining crew's production tally was a good way to start the kind of labor action that made the Shaft Tertius riot look like a disagreement over lunch portions. Every ton of ore extracted, processed, and loaded was recorded by the guild shift monitors, verified by the weighing servitors, and entered into ledgers that were audited internally by the guild's own accountants. I requested the last 5 years of production data from the guild monitors at Shaft Septimus, Octavis, and Decimus. The monitor at Septimus, a ledger
Governor's lying. Governor wants out.
Keeper named Fallin, who'd worked the production tallies for 20 years, went pale when I made the request. He told me the records were classified under guild charter provisions and required authorization from the guild prefect at Ankaragen. I told him the guild prefect had been killed at Shaft Tertius 6 weeks ago. He said there were alternate authorization protocols. I put my hand on the desk between us and told him that I was the commanding military authority in the northern sector and that I was requisitioning those records under wartime emergency provisions, and that if he wanted to file a formal objection, he was welcome to do so with the administratum office that no longer existed. He gave me the records, but his hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with me or the war. He knew what those numbers said. He'd been recording the real figures for 20 years, while someone above him sent different ones to Ankragen, and he'd kept his mouth shut because that was how things worked on Kothrin. And asking questions about the discrepancy was a good way to lose your position. Or worse. I didn't blame him. I did note it. I also asked Solène, who had the sharpest analytical mind of any of my officers, to compile the figures and calculate the aggregate output for those 3 shafts. It took her 2 days. When she brought me the results, she set the data slate on my desk and stood there, watching me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Something between fury and nausea. The 3 shafts in my sector alone, 3 out of 12 in the northern ore belt, which was itself one of 4 extraction zones on the planet, had produced an average of 7,400 tons of refined adamantium per standard year over the preceding 5-year period. 3 shafts, 7,400 tons. The entire planet, according to the figures lexographer Prime Vark was using for his viability assessment, produced 14,000. The numbers were wrong. Not slightly wrong, not within margin of error wrong. Wrong by a factor that made my hands feel numb when I stared at the data slate. If 3 shafts in one sector produced 7,400 tons, and there were 12 shafts in the northern belt alone, and 3 more extraction zones of comparable size, then Kothrin's actual annual output was not 14,000 tons. It was somewhere in the range of 60 to 80,000, possibly more. I sat with that number. Solène stood across the desk from me, waiting. She'd already done the same calculation. There was only one explanation that fit, and it was so simple and so ugly that it didn't require any creative thinking at all. Governor Maurice Delphine had been falsifying Kothrin's production reports. For years, possibly decades, he had been reporting a fraction of the planet's true output to the Administratum. The difference between the real figures and the reported figures represented tens of thousands of tons of refined adamantium per year that officially didn't exist. Metal that was extracted as raw ore, processed, and loaded onto the bulk hauler.
Governor was underreporting, so he was selling somewhere else. Regular corruption. So I guess he wants out of the planet or something.
Like everything else, but which never appeared on the tithe records. Tonnage that, as far as the Imperium was concerned, had never been pulled from the ground. Where did it go? The same place the profits from any large-scale fraud go, into the hands of the man running the scheme. Delphine was selling the unreported surplus through off-ledger channels, probably to rogue traders or independent merchants willing to buy untithed ore at below-market rates and ask no questions. The revenue from those sales went directly into Delphine's personal accounts, and in return, Kothrin paid a reduced tithe based on the artificially deflated output figures. Delphine got rich. The mining guilds, who were almost certainly in on it at the leadership level, got a reduced production burden. And the Administratum, which had never bothered to audit a minor mining world in a remote subsector, accepted the numbers at face value. A self-sustaining cycle of fraud that benefited everyone involved, as long as nothing disrupted it, as long as no one looked too closely, as long as no one had a reason to compare the guild logs to the official reports. As long as nothing happened that made the Imperium care about Kothrin enough to check. Something had happened. The orcs had happened. And now a Munitorum lexographer Prime was sitting in a bunker under Ankragen, calculating.
Of course, if the governor produced the real output, he'd get caught.
Whether Kothrin was worth saving based on production figures that were a third of the truth. And the answer he was reaching was no. because 14,000 tons per year didn't justify a military intervention. But 60 to 80,000 tons did. Easily. A world producing that much adamantium was a significant strategic asset, the kind of asset that warranted a full guard deployment, possibly even naval support. Delphane's fraud hadn't just enriched him, it had killed us. Every soldier who died since the invasion, every one of my 912 who was now dust in the tunnels, every civilian crushed under orc boots on the surface, all of them were dead because a governor had cooked the books to skim the surplus. And when the crisis came, the Imperium looked at his fake numbers and decided we weren't worth the ammunition. My mother used to say I was born with my feelings packed too deep, like ore in a compressed seam, and that someday the pressure would crack me open. She was right. It just took a war and a dead governor to reach the right depth. I went back to Ankaragan. I took Palak, I took Solen, and I took the guild production records on a secured data slate. 12 hours through the tunnels, moving fast, not stopping for rest. When I reached the bunker complex, I didn't bother with the governor's security checkpoints. I went straight to Houghton Vark's office and walked in without knocking. Vark was at his desk, working on a data slate, his sealed briefcase open beside him for the first time since I'd seen it. The briefcase contained more data slates, stacked neatly, along with what looked like a portable cogitator unit and several rolls of sealed parchment bearing administratum seals. The data slates had colored tabs on their spines: green, amber, red. I read 3 world designations upside down before Vark shifted a pile of parchment to cover them. Most of the tabs were red. He looked up when I entered, and his expression was the same polite professional blankness as before. He asked if I had an appointment. I told him I had something better, the real production numbers. I put the guild records on his desk and showed him the figures. 3 shafts, 7,400 tons per year. 12 shafts in the northern belt alone. 4 extraction zones on the planet. The real output. The mathematics that turned Cothran from a world not worth saving into one that was. Vark studied the data. He took his time. He cross-referenced the guild figures with the official reports in his own records, and I watched his expression change as he worked through the discrepancy. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't gasp or pale or stammer. The change was subtle, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a tightening of his lips, the focused stillness of a man who has just discovered that the ground he's standing on is not as solid as he believed. When he finished, he set the data slate down carefully and looked at me. The discrepancy was significant. The guild records, if verified, would materially alter his viability assessment. A planet producing 60 to 80,000 tons of adamantium per year would meet the threshold for full military intervention without question. Then he told me he couldn't use them. I remember the silence in that room, the hum of the ventilation system, the distant concussion of orc shells hitting the surface far above us. Palak standing behind me, very still. Solen with her hands clenched at her sides. Vark explained in his careful, measured, toneless way why the guild records were useless to him. His assessment was based on official administratum production data, verified and stamped by the planetary governor's office, submitted through proper channels, and entered into the sector production registry at Vethrain. That data showed 14,000 tons per year. It had shown approximately that figure for the better part of 2 decades. The guild records, while potentially accurate, were unofficial. They had not been submitted through proper channels. They had not been verified by administratum auditors. They carried no official stamp. Using them as the basis for his assessment would require him to formally declare that the official administratum records were fraudulent, which would trigger an investigation, not just into Governor Delphane, but into the entire reporting chain. Do you understand what that means? Vark asked me, and his voice was perfectly level. It means the subsector audit office that accepted and filed those reports for 2 decades was either complicit in the fraud or negligent in its oversight.
Definitely negligent.
It means my superiors, the ones who sent me here, failed in their fundamental duty to verify the data they were using to make strategic decisions. It means the Munitorum's resource allocation for this entire subsector has been based on falsified inputs, which means every decision made using those inputs is potentially flawed. The scope of institutional failure implied by this discrepancy extends well beyond this planet, well beyond this subsector, potentially to sector level. He stopped. He looked at me. And then, in the same measured tone he might use to report a filing deadline, he told me that he could not submit an assessment that exposes an institutional failure of that magnitude. The consequences would be cascading and uncontainable. Careers would end. Departments would be restructured.
Right.
Investigations...
It's not like, people would die.
...would consume resources that are needed elsewhere. My superiors would not forgive the man who pulled that thread, regardless of whether the thread needed pulling. I have a career. I have a family on Vethrain. I have obligations that extend beyond this room and this planet. He paused. I am sorry, Major Vrass. Genuinely. But I will be filing my assessment based on the official figures. My recommendation will be against further military investment. Cothran will be classified as an acceptable strategic loss. He reached into the briefcase and withdrew a fresh data slate. From a small case beside the cogitator, he selected a colored tab, red, and pressed it onto the spine. Then he set it beside the others and picked up his stylus. I watched him write our world's designation on the label in small, precise lettering, and I understood what the other red tabs meant. How many worlds were in that briefcase? How many times he'd had this conversation? Palik put his hand on my arm. I didn't know why until I looked down and saw that my hand was on my sidearm. I hadn't drawn it. I hadn't made a conscious decision to reach for it. My body had...
Fuck that! He will not leave this planet alive! That guy will not leave this planet alive! That was me. That dude will not leave this planet alive. No one gets away clean. That dude will not leave the planet alive.
Had simply done what my mind was considering, the way you flinch from a heat source before you consciously register the burn. Palik's grip was firm. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I took my hand off the sidearm.
He will not see this family
I looked at
again.
Vark, who had not moved, who was watching me with those wet slate eyes, and who I believe understood exactly how close he had come to dying in that converted storage room. I said 3 words. Where is Delphine? Vark told me. Lower levels, personal quarters, under guard. We left Vark's office and went deeper. Palik's hand stayed near his weapon. Solène walked beside me with the data slate tucked under her arm and murder in her eyes. We passed through the 3rd checkpoint and I turned right.
I would have dragged the clerk with us. We screwed that. That guy will not leave this planet alive. Right? He will not leave this planet alive.
Toward the sealed blast door that the guard had called restricted storage. It wasn't locked. The access panel had been left active. Whoever used this corridor expected to use it again soon and didn't want to waste time on security codes. The corridors beyond narrowed as we descended, the bunker's lower levels less finished than the upper ones, rough-cut stone instead of reinforced panels, the air thicker and warmer from the geothermal vents that heated the deep rock. Delphine's personal quarters occupied a section of the lowest level that had been converted from an emergency shelter into something approaching luxury. Actual doors instead of blast hatches. Lighting that wasn't the harsh white of industrial lamps, the faint smell of incense, or perhaps the scented air filters that only very wealthy people could afford. The guards at his door were the same house troops as before. I told them I needed to see the governor on an urgent operational matter. They told me the governor was sleeping and could not be disturbed. I told them I was not asking. One of them reached for his weapon, and Palik hit him in the throat with the stock of his last gun, a single precise movement that dropped the man to his knees, choking. The other guard assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of a professional and stepped aside. Delphine was not sleeping. He was sitting at a desk in a room that contained, among other things, a cot with actual sheets, a portable heating unit, 3 cases of Amasec that had clearly been brought from off-world, and a Vox unit that was tuned to a frequency I didn't recognize. He looked up when we entered, and for a moment his expression was pure confusion. 3 armed, filthy, battle-worn PDF officers standing in his private quarters at the bottom of a bunker while his world burned above them. Then his eyes flicked to a chronometer on the desk beside the Vox unit, and the confusion became something else entirely. I put the data slate on his desk, the guild production figures. I showed him what they said and what Vark had said about them. I watched his face as the information settled in, and I learned something about Governor Maris Delphine in that moment that I hadn't known before. He wasn't surprised. Not by the numbers and not by Vark's refusal to use them. He'd known. He'd known the real figures, obviously, since he was the one falsifying them. But he'd also known, or at least suspected, that the Munitorum's assessment would be based on his fraudulent data and that the assessment would recommend abandonment. He'd known, and he hadn't done anything about it. I asked him why. Why hadn't he corrected the records when the invasion started? Why hadn't he transmitted the real production figures to Subsector Command along with the distress signal?
There was someone
Why
else above
hadn't he
him.
told the truth when the truth could have saved his world? Delphine looked at me with the expression of a man explaining something obvious to someone too slow to grasp it. He told me that transmitting the real figures would have been a confession. It would have exposed nearly 20 years of tithe fraud, which under imperial law was a capital offense. He would have been arrested, tried, and executed, even if the reinforcements came, even if the planet was saved. The price of honesty was his life, and he had determined with the cold self-interest of a man who had built his entire career on self-interest that he would rather die in an orc invasion with his crimes hidden than live out his days in an administratum penal colony with his crimes exposed. And then the Vox unit on his desk spoke. Not to us. A voice, tight and professional, cutting through on the private frequency. Frigate Palescent confirming extraction window, 48 hours from current mark. Single shuttle, pad coordinates as previously agreed. 1 passenger plus personal effects, maximum mass 200 kilograms. The voice asked Delphine to confirm. The room was very still. Delphine's eyes moved to the Vox unit and then back to me, and in that moment the last piece of it fell into place. The private frequency. The escort frigate holding station at the system's edge. A single shuttle, 1 passenger, extraction window in 48 hours. He hadn't just accepted that the planet would die. He'd planned for it. He'd negotiated his own way out before the penal company had even landed, probably before the distress signal had finished transmitting. When Vark's assessment was filed and the order came to withdraw, the frigate would send a shuttle for the Lexographer Prime, and for 1 additional passenger. Governor Maris Delphine, with his personal fortune transferred to off-world accounts, stepping onto a shuttle while his people bled in the tunnels below. He'd planned everything. The fraud, the cover-up, the escape. He'd had it planned for years, probably, a contingency built into the architecture of his corruption from the beginning. If things ever went wrong, if the Imperium ever came looking, if the world ever fell, he had a way out. And now things had gone wrong in the worst possible way, and his way out was sitting on his desk humming quietly on a private frequency while 800 and something PDF soldiers and 300 and something convict troops and Emperor alone knew how many civilians fought and died to hold a world that their own governor had condemned. What I remember is the weight of the last pistol in my hand, which was a familiar weight because I'd carried that sidearm every day for 11 years. I remember the sound it made when I pressed it against Governor Maris Delphane's face, the metallic click of the barrel touching skin. A sound so quiet it shouldn't have been audible over the ventilation system, but somehow was. I remember his eyes, very wide, very aware, calculating even now, assessing the odds, looking for the angle. There was no angle. I fired. Palik took the Vox unit before the governor's body had finished falling. He was already on the private frequency, hailing the escort frigate. Before I'd holstered my sidearm, I don't know what he said to the frigate captain. I was standing over Delphane's desk, looking at the Amasec and thinking about my mother on the sorting floors, breathing dust until it killed her, producing wealth that this man had stolen and hidden and used to buy himself comfort while his world died around him. It didn't matter what Palik said. The frigate captain, upon hearing that his private arrangement was no longer viable and that the man who'd been paying him was now dead on the floor of a bunker, cut the connection and didn't respond to further hailing attempts. Within 6 hours, our auger stations detected the frigate's drive signature moving away from the system's edge, accelerating towards the translation point. It was leaving, taking Lexographer Prime Vark's assessment with it, already transmitted, already filed, already on its way through the bureaucratic chain that would formalize Cotherin's death warrant. The penal company transports, lighter and slower than the frigate, remained in orbit for another 2 days before they too departed. No shuttle came for Vark or his provost guard. No shuttle came for anyone. We were alone. I returned to the northern sector with the knowledge that I had killed a planetary governor, committed a capital crime under imperial law,
no one
and
gets
accomplished
out alive.
Absolutely nothing of strategic value by doing it. Delphane was dead. His fraud was still hidden. Vark's assessment was already transmitted. The reinforcements that could have saved us would never come. The killing had been an act of justice, or vengeance, or perhaps just the final reflex of a man whose capacity for accepting injustice had been exceeded. I don't know which. It doesn't matter. Delphane was dead, and we were still dying, and the arithmetic of the situation had not changed by a single digit. What had changed was me. After that, I was no longer a loyal Imperial officer. The distinction might seem academic given the circumstances, but it mattered to me. A loyal officer follows the chain of command and trusts the system to function. I had shot the system's representative in the face. Whatever I was now, it answered to the people in my tunnels and to no one else. I told my officers, all of them. Palik and Solène already knew. I sat Kos and Obach down in my command post at Shaft Septimus and laid it out. The fraudulent production figures, Vark's refusal to amend his assessment, the governor's escape plan, the governor's death. No reinforcements were coming. The Imperium had classified Cothrin as an acceptable loss. Every man and woman fighting in the tunnels was doing so without any prospect of rescue, relief, or recognition. Kos stared at the floor for a long time. Obach, who had been 6 months from retirement when the orcs came and had watched that retirement recede with each passing day, leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. He didn't ask about the governor. He didn't ask about the fraud. The only question he had was whether there was any way off the planet. I told him no. He nodded, and the nod had a quality of finality to it that I didn't like but didn't have time to examine. Then he asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to fight. Not because I believed we could win. The orc numbers were growing, not shrinking. For every greenskin we killed in the tunnels, 2 more seemed to arrive on the surface. They had established permanent camps across the northern plain, scrap-built settlements that grew visibly each day. And the auger stations, the ones that still functioned, were detecting additional rocks inbound from the outer system. This wasn't a war band anymore. This was an established WAG, a self-sustaining engine of greenskin expansion that would eventually consume the entire planet, regardless of how many we killed in the dark. I wanted to fight because stopping meant accepting that every soldier who died under my command had died for nothing. Because somewhere in the tunnels behind me, there were civilians, thousands of them, who were alive because my soldiers were standing between them and the green tide. Because this was my world, and the Imperium had forfeited its claim on our obedience when it forfeited its claim on our survival. I didn't say any of that to Kos and Obak. I just said, "We fight." And they nodded because what else was there? I made one more trip to Ankh-Ragen. Not to the governor's bunker, which had been sealed after Delphane's death by his house troops, who had discovered the body and drawn their own conclusions. I went to the Vox array at Central Command, the most powerful communications equipment on the planet, and I transmitted a message on an open channel to anyone in range. Not a distress call, not a plea for reinforcements. I transmitted the guild production figures, the real numbers, alongside the official administratum records, with Governor Delphane's name and the discrepancy laid out in plain language that any clerk—
Might as well, no one gets out alive. Smear his name, screw that guy.
—or captain or merchant could understand. Then I transmitted it again, and again. I set the broadcast to repeat on a continuous loop across every frequency the array could reach. On the second day of the broadcast, a Vox operator at Central Command picked up an automated acknowledgement signal. Imperial merchant vessel Caesarin Secundus, passing through the outer system, confirming receipt and logging the transmission into its navigation archive. One ship, one copy of the truth, stored in a cogitator bank, carried away from Kothrin at the speed of a bulk freighter's warp drive. It might never be read. It might be purged during routine data maintenance. It might sit in an archive for 1,000 years. But it existed, and it was beyond anyone's ability to destroy or cover up, and that was enough. That had to be enough. Lexographer Prime Vark was still in the bunker when I made that broadcast. I don't know if he heard it. I didn't go looking for him. What would have been the point?
He can die.
He was a
there.
small man caught in a large machine, and the machine had made its decision, and his role in it was finished. I heard later, through the communication network's fragmentary reports, that Vark and his 4 provost guards were killed 9 days after the frigate's departure, when a force of orcs breached the western approach tunnels to Ankh-Ragen and overran the lower levels of the bunker complex. I don't know the details. I don't want to know. The last weeks were a compression of everything that had come before, stripped down to its essential elements. Fighting, dying, retreating, fighting again. The orcs pushed into the northern tunnels with increasing force and increasing sophistication. They brought heavy weapons underground, crude but effective, big-bore cannons mounted on tracked platforms that barely fit through the hauler tunnels, and that turned our choke points into abattoirs when they found the range. They brought burner boys, greenskins with flame weapons who filled entire gallery sections with fire, and forced us to abandon positions we'd held for weeks. They brought something worse. Orc mech boys who began disassembling our tunnel defenses from the inside, bypassing blast doors, not by breaking through them, but by cutting through the rock beside them with tools that shouldn't have worked as well as they did. We lost Shaft Undecimus on the 87th day, Shaft Decimus on the 91st, Shaft Nonus, where the penal company had been holding the forward line, on the 94th. Discipline Mistress Varsk died at Nonos, which is worth mentioning because of how she died. Not in the tunnel fighting, but standing on the surface above the shaft entrance, in the open, firing a heavy bolter she'd taken from an orc corpse at a mob of greenskins charging across the waste ground. She killed an enormous number of them before they reached her. Her surviving convicts, the ones who made it back to our lines at Shaft Octavis, said she'd been laughing. I choose to believe that. By the 100th day, I had 406 combat-effective soldiers, approximately 140 armed civilians, and 3 shaft complexes, Septimus, Octavius, and the deep levels of Duodecamus. Captain Palik died on the 96th day. We were holding a junction between Shaft Octavius and the main transit tunnel, the 2 of us, and a squad of 12 miners with repurposed blast charges, covering the withdrawal of a platoon that had been cut off during an orc push through the upper galleries. I heard the stick bomb before I saw it, that distinctive metallic rattle as it bounced off the tunnel wall behind him. Palik heard it too. He turned his head. He had time to look at me, and I think he had time to know what the sound meant, because the expression on his face wasn't fear. It was something closer to apology, as if dying at a time when I needed him was an inconvenience he regretted causing. Then the charge detonated against his back and threw him forward, and by the time I reached him, there was nothing to reach. Palik had been the quiet center of my command for years. The man who did the thinking I didn't have time for and made the calls I didn't want to make. Replacing him wasn't possible. I promoted his senior sergeant and kept fighting, because that was what Palik would have done if it had been me on the tunnel floor instead of him. Captain Koss was alive but wounded, fighting with one arm bound to his chest and a burn across the left side of his face that had taken his ear and most of the skin from temple to jaw. Captain Solen was alive, still counting, still calculating, still tracking ammunition expenditure rates and supply projections and all the numbers that gave shape to our disintegration. Captain Obach was not dead. He was gone. His soldiers at Shaft Decimus found his quarters stripped during the retreat, armor stacked neatly, weapons laid out on the cot, personal effects missing. Deliberate. One of his sergeants told me Obach had been asking questions in the days before the assault. Which tunnels still connected to Ankragen, how far the orc presence extended along the southern transit routes, whether the governor's bunker complex was still accessible from the subsurface rail network. I told him the governor was dead and the frigate gone. He'd nodded and said nothing, and I'd taken the nod for acceptance. I was wrong. He hadn't believed me or hadn't wanted to, and somewhere in his head the rumors of an evacuation shuttle had hardened into a certainty that no fact of mine could dislodge. He was out there now, somewhere in 60 kilometers of orc-held tunnels, walking toward a rescue that had never existed, and that I had made certain never would. I didn't waste soldiers looking for him. The basilisk was gone, destroyed on the surface by orc artillery, when they finally located the concealed emplacement. The chimeras were gone, 2 destroyed in the tunnel fighting and 1 sealed behind a collapsed section that we'd detonated to stop an orc advance. The autocannons were either destroyed or down to their last ammunition drums. We had lasguns, a dwindling supply of power cells, the mining charges that served as our demolition reserves, and the stubborn, grinding, bone-deep determination of people who had decided to keep fighting because they had forgotten how to stop. The miners were the last surprise of the war. The shaft, crews, and hauler teams and demolition specialists who joined us as armed auxiliaries had, over the course of 100 days, become something I hadn't anticipated. Effective soldiers. Not in the traditional sense. They couldn't march or drill or execute textbook fire and maneuver tactics. But they knew the tunnels the way they knew their own hands, and they used that knowledge in ways my PDF training had never considered. They collapsed access tunnels onto orc concentrations with precision charges placed at structural weak points only they could identify. They rerouted ventilation systems to funnel toxic mining gases into occupied sections. They used the ore hauler rails to send unmanned carts loaded with blasting charges into enemy positions, crude rail bombs that were wildly inaccurate but psychologically devastating. They fought with the tools of their trade, and in the tunnels of Cothrin, those tools were formidable. It wasn't enough. Nothing we had was enough. The orcs kept coming, and they kept learning, and on the 109th day they launched what I recognized immediately as the final assault. Not a war band, not a raiding party. An army. Thousands of them, pouring into every tunnel entrance in the northern sector simultaneously, a coordinated push that hit all 3 remaining shaft complexes at once. I'd never seen coordination like that from orcs, and it told me something that I'd suspected for weeks. Somewhere on the surface, a war boss had taken control, a genuine leader, one with enough raw cunning to direct the disparate war bands toward a unified objective. The Way Egg had a brain now, and the brain had decided it wanted our tunnels. We fought. There is nothing else to say about those hours, except that we fought. In the dark and the dust and the heat, with everything we had left, and some things we didn't know we had. Shaft Duodecimus fell first, the deep levels overrun by a force that had found an unmapped bore shaft and come up through the floor of the emergency shelter where 200 civilians were huddled in the dark. I heard the screams on the Vox before the signal cut out, and I will hear them for whatever time remains to me, which is not much. Shaft Octavis fell next. Koss held the main gallery junction for an hour with 60 soldiers before the orcs brought up one of their tracked cannons and put 3 rounds into the barricade at point-blank range. The blast killed 30 of his troops and brought down a section of tunnel roof. Koss and the survivors fell back to the deep levels, linking up with a group of miners who guided them through a network of survey shafts too narrow for the orcs to follow. Some of them made it to Septimus, some of them didn't. That left Shaft Septimus, the oldest mine in the northern belt, the anchor of my defensive line, the last position. I had 219 soldiers, 60 armed civilians, and Captain Solen, who stood beside me at the command post and told me our ammunition stocks would last approximately 4 more hours at the current rate of expenditure. She said it the way she said everything, precisely, clearly, without wasted emotion. Then she picked up a las gun and went to the barricade. The orcs came down the main hauler ramp in a tide of green flesh and crude metal. The tunnel was wide here, wide enough for the hauler trains that used to carry ore to the surface, and the width worked against us. We couldn't create the choke points that had served us so well in the narrower passages. The heavy stubbers chewed through the first wave and the second, but the third wave came over the bodies of the first 2, and the fourth came over those, and the barricade began to give. I fought at the barricade. There was nowhere else to be. I fired my last pistol until the cell was empty, and then drew the combat knife I'd carried since my first year in the PDF, and used that. Around me, my soldiers did the same. Solen was to my left, firing controlled bursts from her lasgun with the calm efficiency she brought to everything. Koss was somewhere to the right. I could hear him shouting orders through the chaos. Miners stood shoulder to shoulder with PDF troopers, swinging picks and pry bars and smelting hammers, weapons that had been designed to break rock and turned out to be equally effective at breaking bone. The barricade fell. The orcs poured through. The fighting became the kind of close, desperate, suffocating violence that exists beyond tactics and training, where every action is instinct and reflex, and the raw animal need to survive 1 more second. I saw Solen go down. A greenskin with a blade the length of my arm hit her across the chest, and she folded around the impact and didn't get up. I tried to reach her, and a blow caught me from behind, drove me to my knees, and sent white light flooding across my vision. I rolled, stabbed upward with the knife, felt it catch on flesh, pulled it free, got to my feet. Something was wrong with my left side, ribs broken, probably. Breathing was a sharp, wet sound that I tried not to think about. I fired my sidearm, realized it was empty, dropped it, picked up a last gun from the ground, fired again. The tunnel was full of green, full of noise. The screaming of humans and the roaring of orcs and the sharp crack of lass fire and the deeper, uglier sound of crude orc weapons, discharging rounds designed more for noise than accuracy. Bodies underfoot, human and xenos, the footing treacherous with blood and spent casings and debris. I fell back with what was left of the line, deeper into Septimus, down through galleries I'd walked 1,000 times, past equipment lockers and shift offices and mess halls where my soldiers had eaten and slept and played cards and waited for rescue that was never coming. We made our last stand in the primary extraction gallery, the deepest accessible point of Shaft Septimus, a chamber so far below the surface that the rock walls were warm to the touch from the planet's own heat. There were 43 of us. I didn't count. Solen would have counted, but Solen was dead. Koss was there, one-armed and bleeding from a cut above his remaining ear. A handful of miners. The rest were PDF soldiers, men and women who had been under my command for years, and whose names I knew and whose faces I could see in the dim emergency lighting that was the only illumination left. I could hear the orcs coming. That sound, the sound of a greenskin horde moving through tunnels, is something that is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't heard it. It's not just footsteps and voices. It's the rock itself vibrating with the weight and force of the creatures moving through it. A deep, percussive rumble that you feel in your teeth and your bones before you hear it with your ears. I looked at the soldiers around me. They looked back. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said over 109 days of fighting in the dark. I checked my last gun. 3/4 charge on the cell. Enough. The orcs came around the corner of the gallery and into the extraction chamber, and we opened fire, and the last battle of Cothrin's northern sector began in the belly of the planet where it had always lived. I fought until the Lasgun's cell died, and then I fought with the knife, and then I fought with my hands. Then something hit me, and the warm rock of the gallery floor was against my face, and the sound of the fighting was receding, pulling away from me the way the surface pulls away from a man falling down a shaft, getting smaller and more distant with every heartbeat. The last thing I heard was the drilling. Not orc weapons, not screaming. The deep, rhythmic, tectonic pulse of Cothrin's extraction rigs, still running somewhere in the deeper shafts, still pulling ore from the planet's bones. The machines that had outlasted everything, that would keep working long after the last human on the planet was dead, feeding rock into a process that no longer had a purpose. The drills didn't know we'd been abandoned. The drills didn't know the numbers were wrong. The drills just kept drilling, the way they always had, the way they always would, until there was nothing left to pull from the ground, or no one left to pull it. That sound followed me down into the dark, and I let it take me, because I was tired, and the shift was over, and there was no one coming to relieve me.
That was it, wasn't it? Holy crap. Anyways, you guys, that's all the time we have for tonight. I'll see you all on Sunday. Alright? Like it if you do and subscribe. Emperor knows we need it, okay?